Great. Thank you, Andy. And thank you to you and WSRA for putting this together. We certainly appreciate it. Just wanted to quickly give perspective of one industry, our industry, the beverage industry, and the Washington Beverage Association. Our companies are very much committed, as I think many of you know, to that circular economy. They've made ambitious commitments to get their bottles back so they can be remade into new ones, and thus using less virgin plastic, plus improving the amount of plastic waste going into the environment. We're now investing and committing to the policies that help accomplish that. And one of the things our board did was approve a forward position on EPR. And we've put out some principles on how we think you could build a strong EPR system, which we submitted as part of the Cascadia process, and can provide those to anybody who's interested. But we engaged with Washington because after our board took that position, you are the state that is out on the forefront of talking about EPR, and really wanted to engage in the process and appreciate the opportunities we've had to do so far, and look forward to working with everyone going forward, and think today's event will be a great way to get some more insight into the process and where you're headed. And see Representative Fitzgibbon, thank you too for hearing us and working with us. We look forward to working with you and your colleagues going forward too. So Andy, thank you for the quick time, but just wanted to give you a perspective from one industry and how we're looking at this.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. Just as a reminder before we move on to the next agenda item, I don't know if people are familiar with the kind of view settings, so it might be useful to keep Zoom in speaker view just because we've got a lot of panelists today. So without further delay, let's get on to that first session, the legislative panel. As a reminder, also, we're doing Q&A through the Q&A format. And so, Heather, I think it's over to you.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Very happy to see everyone participating today. For the audience, you're going to have the best view of the legislator panel if you put your view into speaker view, which is in the top right-hand corner of your Zoom. And also, if you need to change your name and you're not sure on the participant list, if you click on the participant list, then you can click on your name, and to the right, you can change your name and affiliation. So, Kevin, do you mind turning off your video so that we can have let's see, the other legislators come forward a bit. Okay, great. Okay, so we are going to start with a lightning round. I'm going to ask each of the legislators to introduce themselves and describe their district, because we have people from across the U.S. On the call today, on the Zoom event today. And also to answer a question, which is, what waste item has been the most difficult for you during COVID? And we're going to start with Representative Joe Fitzgibbon.
Thanks, Heather. I'm Joe Fitzgibbon. I represent the 34th District, which is in West Seattle, White Center, Burien, and Vashon Island. And I know it's been hard for me to use so many single-use food takeout containers. Of course, trying to support my local restaurants during this time, which is super hard for them. But I haven't figured out a good way or a good, reliable way yet to having some single-use waste to throw in the garbage at the end of the meal.
Cool, thank you. Okay, Senator Doss, could you describe your district and also what's been difficult for you in terms of waste during the COVID?
Hi, everybody. Senator Mona Doss from the 47th District. I've been talking so much, I have lost my voice. I am representing, the honor to represent Kent, Covington, and Auburn, so South King County, a little south of Seattle. I'm with Joe. I've been doing a lot of supporting of local restaurants, and I try to remember to say no utensils, and sometimes I forget, and so now I have a collection of plastic utensils in my kitchen drawer, and I have lots of I have metal ones too. So it's like, yeah, I agree with Joe. That's been the hardest thing about COVID for me.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, let's turn it over to Representative Strom Peterson.
Good morning, Heather. Good morning, everybody. Representative Strom Peterson in the 21st District. So I'm just north of Seattle in southwest Snohomish County with a lot of waterfront, a couple of ferry lines. So plastic pollution, pretty big deal, especially when it comes to marine plastics. Toughest thing for me, I'm actually a restaurant owner and we're still doing all takeout and curbside. We're not doing any in-room dining. So I see the stuff going out of my restaurant, which is always like, it's a financial hit on the restaurant, but really you think of the waste stream. So we're still working as much as we can with compostables when we can get them. The supply line can be a little tight on some of those things. So that's certainly the toughest part. And just in kind of with new kind of increased cleanliness and hygiene, we're going through a lot of plastic gloves. A lot of plastic gloves. And those are really painful because they're just going straight into the landfill.
Wow. And then finally, Senator Christine Rolfes.
Hi, thanks, Heather. Hi, everybody. I am State Senator Christine Rolfes. I represent the 23rd Legislative District, which is across the water. It's to the west of Seattle, across Puget Sound. And I represent the ferry communities that's Strom, on the other side of Strom's district, Bremerton, Kingston, and Bainbridge Island. And I'm going to go with takeout containers personally as the biggest impact to me, because I pride myself on not having stuff like that come into my house, and there is no way around it. And before I stop, I would just want to say, Strom, are you doing mac and cheese takeout?
Yes.
Yeah,
in compostable containers, and it's delicious.
Yeah, so I'm putting in a plug for Strom's mac and cheese.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we have a longer format question. Representative Fitzgibbon, we know that climate change is your key work. How do you see the connection between waste and climate change, and in particular, the rise of the use of plastic products?
Yeah, well, thanks, Heather. That's where a big part of my interest in waste reduction comes from, is in finding the most energy smart, energy conservation minded approaches to getting us the products that we use in our lives. And there's no question that we've seen a big growth in the amount of plastics coming into our homes as the plastics industry has really scaled up. I know that the oil industry in particular is looking at how can they sustain the levels of production that they're at once we start to transition away from the use of oil for transportation fuel, which is obviously something that we urgently need to do. And they're really looking at plastics as the growth sector, that's where all of the oil that they continue to utilized. All of this to produce materials coming into our homes, whether paper or metal or plastic, are really energy intense. And recovering materials from the waste stream and then recycling them into products, including post-consumer content, is just much more energy efficient and reduces our contribution to climate change, reduces the air pollution outputs that impact people's health. And one of the things about climate change, which is different than many of the other environmental issues that we tackle, is it's so global in nature that when say a petrochemical refinery in Louisiana is refining or when an aluminum mill in, say, Pennsylvania is refining aluminum for beverage cans, that has the same just as much as if those greenhouse gases were emitted here in Washington. And so we need to be really cognizant of how our actions and how our economy here in Washington is catalyzing more emissions. Even if those emissions aren't strictly happening within our borders, they still impact us in just the same way. And so I think that there's a huge amount of reductions in our energy intensity as Washingtonians that can come from doing a better job with recycling and getting materials from our waste stream back into productive use.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was great. Senator Doss, we know that your nickname around the Senate is the Plastic Warrior. Can you tell us about why you care about plastic pollution and addressing the issue?
Yes, well, I'll start with my time in Ireland. So in 2003, I moved to Ireland for a year, and I'll never forget that I always knew when someone was going to the grocery store because they always carried, a large quantity of reusable bags underneath their arms. And, when I lived in Ireland, I also was carless. And so, I got really used to going to the grocery store every few days with my bags. And I will tell you, I am cheap about the weirdest things. I will squeeze every ounce out of a shampoo bottle, but I will spend $100 at Strom's restaurant without thinking about it. And so when the first time I went, was in Ireland and I had to use, they charged 5 cents for a plastic bag, and back in 2003. And I will tell you, I paid for a plastic bag exactly one time. And after that, I never paid for a plastic bag again because I always remembered to bring my bag, and I refused to pay 5 cents for something that I had in my home. And so sometimes I would be caught if without the bag, it wasn't in my pocket or whatever. And I would carry them home, carry the items home. And you make decisions based on how much you wanted to carry home as well. And so that's sort of like the beginning of my journey. And then subsequently, I did my MBA in sustainable business. So I really care about the environment and making sure that we aren't leaving plastic waste for the next generation. I have a mantra that I've always had, for a long time, I should say, that if it's not reusable, recyclable, or compostable, it shouldn't be produced. I don't think that it's fair for us consumers to have to deal with all the plastic waste that the four of us have just talked about. We've, are creating and are having to figure out how to recycle. And some of these things just aren't recyclable. And we know, especially all the haulers here on the call, that there's that concept of wish recycling. We wish it could be recyclable, so we throw it in the recycling bin, and now they have to deal with it. So this year, we're introducing the EPR bill alongside with Senator Christine Rolfes, who had the original bill. I'm so excited to bring that forward this year to make some steps in that direction.
Great, thank you so much. And before we go move to Rep. Peterson, I do want to note to the audience, it turns out that even though the Zoom function was supposed to be set up so you can edit your name, it looks like you cannot. Sorry about that. We will send out a participant list afterwards. And wanted to also let you know that we have a few minutes for Q&A with the legislators in a moment. And so if you have a question, please put that in the question and answer box. Representative Peterson, you have led many bills related to product stewardship. What are your thoughts related to how these programs can work well?
Great, thank you, Heather. Yeah, I think kind of broadly, there's just a realization, and Senator Doss just touched on that, about so much of the responsibility ends up with the end consumer, ends up with you and I, or with the recycling companies that are, and waste stream companies that are on the call as well. And it seems that, not to use too much of a water metaphor, but we should move that a little bit upstream. And I think it's really important that producers take some responsibility in the end result of whatever it is that they're producing. Here in Washington, a couple of years ago, we passed the first in the nation statewide drug take back. So we had Big Pharma come to the table after a lot of years, but they finally sat down at the table with us, and we crafted a program where they were financially responsible for the end result of pharmaceuticals, so they could be put in drop boxes and they could be properly incinerated and taken out of people's homes for everything from accidental poisonings, drug overdoses, drugs in the water supply, all of those things we were able to take care of. We've done the same in Washington with electronics, with mercury lights. And so I think this is and paint. We've passed the paint recycling bill last year. which I'm really excited about because I have a dozen cans of paint in my garage. So I think there's just a realization, both from the consumer side, these get a lot of support from local business or local governments because of the cost incurred on local governments when they're trying to deal with this waste. A lot of support from, again, kind of the end use recycling and waste industry, and of course consumers. But I think what we found is we start having these conversations that the producers are starting to see a need for that, to take that responsibility. I think both from a marketing standpoint, they want to be part of this, and also they see that these programs can be effective, and if we charge just a little bit up front, that can really create something down the line. I think, Joe pointed out, creating these markets. How do we make sure that there's a market for this recycling? We take some of those monies that we build up on the front end by charging producers and use that for the R&D at the back end. So there's not a single, I don't think there's a single way to do this producer responsibility work. We've done a couple of different models, and I think it kind of depends, and I think some flexibility in there is really important. So it's been successful so far here in Washington, and I think we've got some good models, and looking forward to seeing some other models from our friends up north.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So Senator Rolfes, we know that addressing our recycling system is a high priority for you. What brought you to this, and what are your hopes for the future? And I think you missed before, you would be having up to 5 minutes right now if you like.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Heather. I grew up in New Jersey, right outside of New York City in the 70s, and that was a time when there were TV reports of like barges filled with garbage floating around the ocean because nobody would take New York City's waste, and New York City dumped all their sewage into the ocean. And when I grew up, I literally thought that rivers and the ocean were brown. That's what the color I colored them when we would color things. And of course, things have changed since then, but the county that I grew up in was one of the early adopters of recycling because it had to be, because there was nowhere for garbage to go. And so I didn't actually know that was weird. My father would take all of our yard waste to the dump and come back with his wood chips, and we would bring our aluminum cans in to get recycled. When I went to college in Virginia, I learned that the world did not recycle the way that suburban New Jersey, urban New Jersey did. And my college roommate literally said, well, we don't have to do that. We have a lot of land here. It's not like New Jersey. And so I started a recycling club at my university in the late 80s. It was called the Student Alliance for Virginia's Environment, or SAVE. And we started recycling, and we had the first paper drive in Charlottesville. And it was a huge honor when we got the state of Virginia's Student Achievement Award, and we all got to go to the Capitol in Richmond and have dinner or have lunch with legislators. We thought that was pretty cool. So it's sort of been something, I think this whole recycling and stewardship of our resources has been something that was just ingrained in me as a child living in an environment where you had to do that. And it actually was part of why I moved out to Seattle. Diana Gale was the head of solid waste in King County when I was graduating from college. And I was like, that's where I want to be. I want to live in a town where people care about this stuff. And got a degree in public policy with a minor in with a concentration in environmental science from the UW. And have just been doing this kind of work, both professionally and as a legislator for my life. So there's no defining moment other than scarcity and growing up in a place with scarcity. And I do want to say, and just in reflection on Strom's comments about the different stewardship programs that we've adopted in our state, the drug take back was a big fight to get passed and to finally implement. And we based a lot of our program on British Columbia's experience with that. And so we have a kind of a long-standing relationship with the province to our north in terms of looking at successes up in British Columbia and trying to replicate those in Washington. And when we talk to our colleagues across the country, it's kind of a fun relationship to be able to talk about, because let's face it, people in Massachusetts and North Carolina don't know the difference between Washington and Oregon, and they really don't know the difference between British Columbia and Alberta. So it's always fun to give a little geography lesson. I think that answers your question.
Yes, that does. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to move into some questions that are from the audience, and I'm going to start off with one that is about sort of sessions. And if you all could talk about what you're seeing right now in terms of how the session is going to work with regard to COVID. And I've heard rumors that you all are testing how to vote and testing how to do hearings. So I think it would be interesting for the audience to hear how you anticipate the session is going to work logistically, and then what that kind of means for bills. Do you want to start off, Senator Rolfes?
I don't know how much we all need to talk about this. I think the House and the Senate may be doing it differently. We are going to be mostly online with possibly some hybrid voting where on the Senate floor where they're live taking turns, and some people will call in. So they're setting that up. For people who advocate regularly, it's going to be really different because there won't be legislators in Olympia. So a lot of this is going to be Zoom. I think Zoom, Microsoft Teams, I don't know what the platform will be. But my vote was to shorten it to a 60-day session. And it looks like it's going to be 105 days of Zoom. Committees will meet regularly.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to what Christine said. Besides, we are on track for an all virtual session in the House. We're not. Well, we do have to convene in person on the first day to amend our rules to allow us to meet virtually. We're going to do that, and a lot of thinking going on about how we can do that safely. We of course will have the option if the transmission rates decline and it looks like the pandemic is coming under control to move in the direction of more in-person meeting. But since that doesn't look like that's the trajectory we're on in the House, we're just planning on being pretty much entirely Zoom based. There will be a few exceptions, for example, for members who have poor internet connections at home, but it's going to be a very different. I remember my first session, we were in portables. Christina will remember that as our office building was remodeled, and and we thought that was uncomfortable. But I think comparing that, and I really feel for the members who are going to be newly elected, and having their first session be all this format, I think is going to be hard, because you do really benefit from getting to know each other face to face. I think that's a big part of how we bond as a team. But that as of today, I would predict we will not be meeting in person other than the first day.
Wow, it's going to be interesting. So Representative Peterson, someone wanted to know the name of your restaurant, and then maybe one of you, and possibly you, could talk about the sort of bottle bill wars from before, and sort of a perspective on bottles.
Yeah, I hope this isn't some sort of ethics violation of promoting my business while on a legislative call, but downtown Edmonds has lots of fine restaurants, so I'll spread the love. But mine is called the Cheesemonger's Table. And then I think on the bottle bill, Representative Mead, who has left the House and has moved to the Snohomish County Council, so in some ways he's dead to all of us, but he did some fantastic work last year on a bottle bill and really sat down with the industry. Again, I kind of go back to and previous comments on this call, where the industries, I think they get it now. They understand that they want to be a part of the solution. They need to be a part of the solution. We talk about sustainability in so many different aspects, and business sustainability is one of them. So if they can find ways to partner with us, I think that's great. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we can work out. Back to the earlier question about the session, I think because of the remote nature, it's going to be a weird session. We're just simply not going to get as much done as we usually do in a 105-day session, which is upwards of 400 pieces of legislation that are actually passed. We'll be doing a lot less, and obviously so much of the focus is going to be on healthcare, police and justice reform, and our budget. Senator Rolfes, good luck, Godspeed with that. So So I think there's going to be a lot of work that we can get done in preparation for following sessions, but I mean, I think everybody on this call certainly wants to work on environmental and energy issues because that is still kind of the existential crisis of our times. But we'll have to see when we get to some of these bills, just what time we have to get these done, especially the more complicated they get.
I just want to make a plug for the LAs and our session aides. Please be nice to them, extra nice to them. They are your access to us. And sometimes they don't get treated well. They're all already very nervous. So please be extra nice to LA, our staff. I really would love your help in that.
And we have less than a minute left. So I was going to ask Senator Doss to bring us home, but maybe I'll ask Senator Rolfes as well. So there is a question of how can residents be the most effective this year in terms of communicating with legislators if it is a remote situation? How do we communicate to you, and I mean the public, to you all about bills this year? And maybe you have a thought, and then if any other quick, really, we're almost out of time here, so quick responses if you don't mind.
I'll just jump in. The residents, our constituents have the same, I think they're going to have the same access to us as they always do. We live in the community, we have phone numbers and emails. I think it's the paid professionals that are used to being able to stop us in the hallways and walk into our offices that will have the biggest challenges to having access. But constituents should not see a change, in my opinion.
Okay, so maybe online lobby days. So people could, instead of coming to Olympia, they'll come to an online meeting with you.
That may be something that organizations should think about. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you all so much. You all are such amazing champions for the environment in our state. We are so grateful to you. And thank you for joining us today. I hope you can stay as much as you can for the really outstanding presentation that Recycle BC has put together. So no one can really applaud, but thank you all so much. And if you don't mind turning off your videos and mute yourself, then that will let Recycle BC come forward.
Cool. Thanks for that, Heather. That was a really interesting panel discussion. There were quite a few questions in Q&A, but we ran out of time, so I'm really sorry we couldn't get to everything. Just a quick reminder, we will, during the Recycle BC presentation, have regular 10-minute intervals for questions after each of the segments. So please use the Q&A function for questions for Recycle BC. So with that, I think I'm going to hand over to Recycle BC. David, if you want to take it away.
Thanks, Andy. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen without any technical glitches here. Okay. Andy, maybe while your mic is still hot, can you tell me if you're seeing my screen well?
Yeah, no, I'm seeing it. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, well, that was a fantastic talk. So thank you to all of the government representatives who just shared their thoughts on so many different issues. And thank you to Heather for hosting us. And thank you to everybody who's tuned into this to learn more about our program. I heard a ton of energy, some commitment, some enthusiasm on some of the environmental issues that we're facing today. And we're certainly very excited to be able to share more about our program and what we've been able to do in British Columbia in a fairly short period of time. It's common in Canada for us to recognize the First Nations that came before us and on whose land we currently reside. For Recycle BC, where I'm presenting today in a generally empty office because of COVID-19, those First Nations are the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. We are on what we consider in BC to be their unceded territory, and I express our gratitude to these nations. They were the original stewards of the environment, and they continue to fulfill that role for us today. Now, we get a lot of requests to speak about our program, and it's no doubt in part a function of the fact that we are the only full producer responsibility program in North America for packaging and paper products, but it's also because of what we've achieved so far. If we had not been successful as we have been so far, then the phone probably wouldn't ring. That's not to say that our program is perfect, far from it. We're still learning every day, we're still striving, we're adapting, we're evolving. And frankly, that's never going to end, because our program is not about one or two state-of-the-art material recycling facilities. It's not about how we collect our materials today, our comparatively low contamination rate, our ability to find end markets. It's actually about all of these things, how we work together, and so much more. It's about designing a program with intention, a program that recognizes the role the waste industry in a province must play in helping producers not only meet their obligations, but also achieve class-leading environmental results. It's about a program that works with local governments to ensure that they can play a role in the collection of recycling and continue to interface with their residents if they wish. And it's about a program that seeks to set the standard on which other programs across Canada can harmonize, making it easier for producers to be compliant with regulatory obligations, giving producers greater access to recycled material so they can meet their sustainability goals, especially around recycled content. And all of this while remaining locally relevant and adaptive to the circumstances that exist in a particular jurisdiction. So I said we get a lot of requests to speak, but we didn't hesitate one bit when Heather called upon us to present to our friends south of the border in Washington State. And in fact, we've pulled together our entire management team to speak with you today. So today you're going to hear from Tamara Burns, who's our Senior Vice President of Operations at Recycle BC. You're going to hear from Jordan Best, our Director of Collection, from Sam Baker, who's our Director of Post-Collection, Lindsay Shohan, our Director of Marketing and Communications, and Maureen Cooper, our Manager of Special Projects. And we're going to take you through our entire program. We're going to start off by providing the Canadian context in which we operate. We're going to show you what we've achieved so far. We're only 6 years young. And then we're going to show you how we did it. We're giving you the Colonel's 11 herbs and spices, the French fries, the gravy, and that strangely delicious neon green coleslaw. We're giving it all to you today. And throughout our presentation, I hope that you'll see that the fundamental theme we're trying to share with you is collaboration. We can't do this alone. We need the waste industry, our local government partners, and most of all, we need the residents in the province. Everyone has to be involved, has to be engaged, and has to be doing their part, or it just doesn't work. Recycle BC, I said, isn't one or two material recovery facilities. It's thousands of moving parts and pieces and people. And you'll see that we've organized these pieces into groups using terms like networks or stakeholders or audiences. But at the end of the day, each of these moving parts is pursuing their own interests as well as the greater good. And that is why it works. Washington isn't alone in looking at full producer responsibility for recycling of residential packaging and paper products. I was looking at the participant list before we joined, and I noted government representatives attending from Oregon, California, Vermont, Nevada, Massachusetts, and even our own British Columbia, where they're quite familiar with our program. So I want to welcome everybody who's joined us today. But the interest doesn't even stop there. A few weeks ago, I was fielding a call from Connecticut. A few months ago, it was a consultancy in Boston. We get calls from across North America and around the world. In the US, large and small states alike are grappling with what to do about what is largely being called a crisis in recycling. And it's fairly trite these days to say that with every crisis, there comes opportunity, but that's actually what we're here to share today. It's the opportunity that lies behind our program, the opportunity to allow producers to design something that responds to the challenges before us, to allow producers to achieve environmental outcomes every one of the jurisdictions I just listed is seeking, and the opportunity to keep our environment pristine for the generations to come. Now, to kick things off, we're going to start with a really short video that's a bit of a snapshot of our program. Then we're going to provide the context, we're going to give you an overview, and you'll hear directly from each of those team members that I just introduced. They are the people that make it all happen, and it was important for us to have them speak with you today. So if we're lucky, I'm going to play this video and it will work.
We take pride in finding ways to preserve our environment. We are a nonprofit organization responsible for residential packaging and printed paper recycling throughout British Columbia. We ensure packaging and printed paper is collected from households and recycling depots, sorted and recycled responsibly. To shift recycling cost away from homeowners, our program is funded by businesses, like retailers, manufacturers, and restaurants that supply packaging and printed paper to BC residents. By recycling more efficiently, we can be part of the solution to keep BC beautiful. Together, we can make a difference. Find out what you can recycle at recyclebc.ca.
Okay, so it's always good to put a little plug there for our website. You can definitely get a ton of information on our website. So when you're done watching this presentation, if you have any other questions, we're pretty sure that most of the answers are going to be found somewhere on our website. We go to great lengths to add information there. So I said I was going to start with the historical context. The province of British Columbia has a long history of residential recycling keeping BC beautiful, and it's proud of its environmental stewardship in the broad sense of the term. Residential recycling services were under municipal solid waste programs, with the local governments funding their programs through their tax rolls. Each local government determined the service type and the materials to be collected and managed. And there wasn't provincial harmonization at that time, although many programs could be fairly similar. Local recycling services were typically contracted out by local governments. Only about a dozen communities used in-house staff for collection. Post-collection was contracted out to private waste management companies, and as with the recycling collection programs, the service contracts varied. So generally, the waste management processor handled the marketing of the materials and bore the risks and costs associated with that. Now, this really shocked me, frankly, when I looked at this. Geographically, BC is larger than our other friends, all three of them in the Pacific Northwest put together. So by population, obviously, the US is quite a bit bigger. The Pacific Northwest trio of Oregon, California, and Washington is 10 times bigger than British Columbia, but it's in a smaller footprint than ours. For example, Washington has 50% more people in your state than we have in our entire province. Now, the Pacific Northwest has a history of collaborating together on the environment. In 2007, there was an MOU between BC and California on climate change. In 2010, there was a collaboration that involved California, Oregon, Washington, and BC to work together on issues related to the environment. In 2019, we aligned to adopt a permanent daylight savings time that allowed us more light in the afternoon so that we could enjoy the beautiful nature that surrounds us. The takeaway here is we have a shared commitment to environmental issues, and we also have a shared commitment to getting a good night's sleep. So, what is the current context? I want to share a little bit about this. It is not new information, but it bears repeating. In 2018, China brought in its national sword. It banned the import of foreign recyclable materials unless they had extremely low contamination levels. This had a huge impact on supply and demand. It impacted communities across Canada, the Pacific Northwest, and around the world. It resulted in communities reducing the materials that are accepted in their programs, stockpiling materials, and even landfilling some materials. And when you look in our country, this was a story that I came across about halfway through the summer. And it's one author, reporter with the Financial Post who wrote a piece talking about a challenge in the province of Ontario. It talks about how 30% of what is collected in the blue box ends up in landfills in Ontario. Now, Ontario is transitioning the current blue box program to a full producer responsibility model. The new model means transitioning costs of the blue box program away from municipal taxpayers and making producers of products and packaging fully responsible for the waste that they create. The model should improve recycling across the province, and address the serious problem of plastic pollution. We also did some very quick research across the country to get a sense of where things are at in the various provinces. And each of these dots either reflects a story that I found online in the media or something that I experienced personally in my travels. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but what you're going to see is right next to Alberta, right next to BC, you have the province of Alberta. There's a little red dot there. And last year, the city of Lacombe, Alberta, actually had to cancel its residential recycling program because it did not have end markets for its materials. When you look at some of those other dots across the country, they are names that all Canadians will know. Likely it might challenge a few people south of the border, but we're talking about Calgary, Moose Jaw, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, Brandon, and Toronto. These are all communities that are reducing what they collect. And yes, we have a place called Moose Jaw in Canada. Now, Montreal had some challenges with plant closures. I personally was in St. John, New Brunswick, where the third largest city in one of our provinces does not have curbside recycling yet and has only unmanned depots for the collection of recycling. Certainly it's striving to get curbside, but it gives you a sense of where recycling can be depending on where you are in the country. There was one story about a city in Ontario where 40% of the recycling that it collects is going to landfill. Now, with all of that, I'm going to hand things over to Tamara Burns, our Senior Vice President of Operations, and she's going to walk you through a little bit more about our program specifically.
Thank you, Dave. I am pleased to provide a brief overview of who we are. Recycle BC is a not-for-profit organization. We are responsible for residential packaging and paper recycling throughout the province of BC. Recycle BC ensures household materials are collected, sorted, and responsibly recycled and recovered. Our program is funded by 1,200 businesses that include retailers, manufacturers, and restaurants that supply packaging and paper to British Columbian residents. Our program shifts costs away from homeowners to the producers and brand owners of packaging and paper. Recycle BC operates within the framework of the Province of BC's Environmental Management Act and Recycling Regulation. A very short history of extended producer responsibility in BC is, in 1994, BC's first EPR program for waste paint was launched. 16 years ago, in 2004, the ministry streamlined its now many EPR programs into a single recycling regulation. Packaging and paper EPR was introduced in 2011, and the packaging and paper industry went to work to organize their program, readying to assume responsibility for end-of-life management of their products. Our program launched in 2014. The BC Recycling Regulation outlines producer responsibility and is divided by product type. For example, Schedule 1 of the regulation addresses beverage containers on deposit, whereas our schedule, Schedule 5 of the regulation, is specific to packaging and paper. On behalf of producers, Recycle BC fulfills the requirement under the regulation to provide collection service, processed material, and market material to end markets. Recycle BC developed its first program plan with the help of experienced consultants and carried out an extensive consultation on the draft plan prior to submitting it to the ministry for approval. We are currently operating based on our second 5-year plan approved by the Ministry of the Environment in 2019. As our program plan outlines, producers of packaging and paper are responsible for reasonable access to packaging and paper services. How are we doing? Well, in 2019, 98.6% of households had access to service. We're also then responsible for the management of that collected packaging and paper. For us, tons have continued to grow, last year by 1%, and we increased our capture rate per capita, as you can see on the slide. We are required to act within the context of the pollution prevention hierarchy. Last year, over 90% of what we collected was recycled. And finally, we must achieve a 75% recovery. In 2019, we achieved a 78.2% recovery rate. Overall, we continued our upward trend of performance improvement. And despite the current recycling markets, we are proud that we are continuing to have positive results. This slide is noteworthy, not just because of the results, but because of what it is. We're one of the few jurisdictions that has established targets for paper, plastic in 2 subcategories, metal and glass, and report these material category recovery rates. I'd like to highlight 2 things from this slide. Paper recovery dropped to 83% in 2019 from 86% in 2018, whereas plastic recovery grew to 46% from 42%, with increases in both rigid and flexible plastic. Rigid's rate increased to 56% from 54% in 2018, as we collected 9% more tons of this packaging type than the prior year. We also collected 15% more flexible packaging year over year, which grew our recovery rate in 2019 to 22% from 19% in 2018. Looking at this in detail, you see that we've achieved great gains in the more challenging to recycle material, particularly flexible plastic. But this is offset to a certain extent by the steady decline in our largest collection category, paper, which is arguably the easiest to recycle category. So as you can see, for 2019, the big picture total number of 78.2% doesn't tell the real environmental outcomes story. We manage our materials in accordance to the pollution prevention hierarchy, meaning we recycle all we can, and if we can't do that, we still do what we can to keep it out of landfill. Here's what our 2019 year looked like. We increased tons of packaging and paper managed by recycling year over year by almost 7,000 tons, an increase of 4%, which resulted in more than 90% of our collected material being managed by recycling. We increased the tons of material managed by engineered fuel by about 2,600 tons by recovering material that would otherwise go to landfill. We decreased the tons managed by disposal by 14%, a reduction of over 2,300 tons. In 2019, safe disposal represents 7% of total material handled, down from 8% last year, despite ongoing challenging markets for materials. It's also interesting to note that we're doing this while we have one of the largest listed lists of accepted materials in Canada, so the most items accepted for recycling. And finally, I just want to talk about how we're funded. We are 100% funded by our Recycling BC members, which are about 1,200 businesses. These producers and brand owners represent retailers, manufacturers, first importers, and restaurants that supply packaging and paper product to BC residents. Our program has contributed $500 million since program inception. And in providing this financing, Recycle BC shifts responsibility upstream away from homeowners to the companies that put the products in the market. And with that quick overview of who we are, I will now hand the presentation back over to Dave.
Thanks, Tamara. So we really can't tell the story of Recycle BC without sharing at least a little bit of information about an organization called the Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance, or what we call CSSA for short. So Recycle BC was designed initially by CSSA on behalf of producers. Tamara was actually part of the team that designed the program, and she now operates it. CSSA now plays an integral support function for Recycle BC and many other programs across Canada. So when we look at CSSA, it supports 6 programs today across Canada. And it's actually timely. I mentioned some changes in Ontario that are happening. Last week, the government announced a proposed regulation and proposed regulatory amendments to make producers fully responsible for operating the Blue Box programs in that province. The regulation is now posted for a 45-day comment period. Now, CSSA also supports organizations like MMSW, the Multi-Material Stewardship Western in Saskatchewan, and that is a 75% payment model. MMSM, Multi-Material Stewardship Manitoba, where businesses pay up to 80% of the municipal costs. Stewardship Ontario, as I mentioned, where currently it's 50%, but the province announced that it is moving in the direction of some new regulations. The Orange Drop, which is for household hazardous or special waste, and automotive material stewardship. So a number of programs that are supported by CSSA. When we talk about the goals that CSSA has, because it designs and then supports so many programs, it's developed a series of goals that we believe most companies and most organizations and most people can rally around. Producers, governments, residents. These are things that everyone should be able to agree on for the greater good. The number one goal is consistent, harmonized regulatory frameworks for recycling programs. This is absolutely key. It considers the positive impact that standardizing the basket of materials collected will have. It standardizes the obligations, including de minimis levels for obligation, revenue, tonnage, and it reduces the burden on producers by making reporting for various jurisdictions easier. A lack of harmonization means producers have to adapt their reporting to each jurisdiction's expectations, and that can be a regulatory nightmare. Another important goal is maximizing recovery of post-consumer materials. It creates better environmental performance, and producers, frankly, need access to the materials to attain their sustainability goals. And then we also have compliance, 100% compliance with all stewardship obligations in all supported programs. These are goals that CSSA believes are fundamental in the sphere that we operate in. Now, it's clear that CSSA has a role to play. It's the umbrella organization for Recycle BC's full producer responsibility program and for the shared responsibility programs that I mentioned in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. The largest compliance solution provider in North America today is CSSA. It helps develop program plans that are harmonized, yet responsive to the needs of local geography and governments. And it interfaces with more than 3,000 program member businesses every year. It administers more than $300 million a year in producer financing on behalf of the recycling programs that it supports. And this is really what CSSA does for the programs that I listed earlier. It provides functions designed to support the entire supply chain, whether it's board and corporate governance, producer registration and reporting, financial and audit services, costing, fee setting, regulatory reporting, analytics, information technology and systems management, communications and stakeholder relations, and project management. For producers, CSSA is an absolutely integral component of the equation because it's actually providing scale. Instead of replicating these functions in every single program that exists and that is responding to a particular regulation, CSSA can provide this support to all of the programs. Now, CSSA has a proven SAP-powered online reporting platform, and that is used both for businesses and for collectors and processors. There's more than 3,000 registered users, and it administers material quantities and it invoices on behalf of programs. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Tamara, and she's going to give us a little bit more about the design of the Recycle BC program.
Thanks again, Dave. Our program was designed with intention, a program that recognizes the role of the waste industry in a province must play in helping producers not only meet their obligations, but achieve class-leading environmental results. A program that works with local governments to ensure they can play a role in the collection of recycling and continue to interface with their residents if they wish. A program that seeks to set the standard with which other programs across Canada can harmonize, making it easier for producers to be compliant with regulatory obligations, giving producers greater access to recycled material so they can meet their sustainability goals around recycled content. All of this while remaining locally relevant and adaptive to the circumstances that exist in a particular jurisdiction. Recycle BC has achieved some great results with our program, and we would like to share some of the elements that we feel contribute to our success to date. Recognizing that we still have a lot more to do, we offer the following really high-level overview of what we see as a recycling system, where after the break, we'll do a deeper dive into each of these chapters of our program. What we collect, how we partner, and how we innovate. Let's start with what we collect. Recycle BC has a standardized material list, which is a common list for collection, which means reduced confusion, and with clarity comes increased quality and less contamination. Our material list is consistent province-wide, regardless of the collection channel. We have 3: curbside, multifamily, and depot. The collection stream, single stream or multi-stream. And our material list is the same everywhere, whether the resident is at home, at their cabin, or traveling the province. As mentioned before, we have the largest basket of accepted materials in Canada. We have and continue to expand the accepted material categories. Examples of this expansion include coffee cups, plastic plant pots, empty coffee pods, aerosol containers, and clamshells. Now let's look at how we collect. Most materials, paper and containers, are collected from homes in various ways depending upon the community, single stream or multi-stream, at their curbside, or from a common area in multifamily dwellings. But certain materials are only collected at the depot. We direct where materials go to be collected to ensure recyclability. For example, glass can be collected segregated at the curb, or if it's not segregated, it goes to a depot. Plastic bags and other flexible plastic packaging are collected at depot, as well as foam packaging is depot only. I just mentioned that certain materials are only collected at depot, but why is that? Well, certain materials break or crumble, such as glass and foam. Certain materials get caught up in machinery, such as plastic bags and soft film packaging. This increases facility downtime and resources to manually remove. And certain materials behave like another material at the sorting facility. For example, plastic bags like paper when mixed into single stream collection. This results in low quality paper bales. We designed a system to keep certain materials segregated from collection through to processing. Just another example of how we tried to build an effective recycling program. And now a look at how we partner to do that. As Dave mentioned, we don't do this alone, and we partner with service providers. First of all, local governments, First Nations, and private waste companies for the 3 channels of collection: curb, multifamily, and depot. Once the residential packaging and paper is collected, it enters our province-wide post-collection network, a constructed waste shed comprised of transporters, receiving facilities, post-collection services, which includes sorting, processing, and marketing, and of course, end markets. Producers bring us back to the beginning for a circular economy. And finally, a look at how we innovate. For research and development, we continue our R&D work on other flexible plastic packaging, which we now collect in a segregated stream at depots and have diverted from landfill. We have a Center for Material Intelligence with CSSA, where we test materials to inform material composition, aid with packaging design, and for fee setting. We're fortunate to have sophisticated data tracking and analysis system, where at the Center for Material Intelligence, we track over 1,800 material audits per year. But beyond that, system-wide, we track hundreds of thousands of material movements This yields rich information for management decisions. We also measure our environmental performance and pursue continuous improvement using data as our source. We'll also talk to you in detail a little later on about sorting sophistication. We separate paper and container into containers at 2 separate sorting facilities. Optical sorters are used in the paper sorting facility. We look to garner clean bales sorted to market specifics, which result in local end markets. So that is a really quick overview of our program that has been designed with intention. We now have time to take questions on this first segment of our presentation before we get into the next section that speaks to specific details of collection.
Yeah, so I think this is where Andy joins us.
Yeah, thanks for that. I really appreciated. There was a lot of information there. We've got some questions coming in. And so I'm just going to dive straight into the questions, if that's okay. So I've had a couple of questions around your customer base. And so I wonder whether you could give more detail on how many people you serve, and then thinking about how that segments out, and how, whether you support and serve multifamily residences, commercial and industry customers.
So that's a good question, and it's actually one that we get quite a bit. So the first and most important thing that we need to share with everybody on this presentation today is that Recycle BC is only responsible for residential recycling of packaging and paper products. So that is only the items that a consumer would be purchasing in a store or online, and then having to dispose either at their curb or in a depot. We are not responsible for materials related to what is traditionally known as institutional, commercial, or industrial materials. In terms of the people that we serve, I think Tamara mentioned we have a 98.6 accessibility for the province of British Columbia. So 98.6% of all households in British Columbia have access to our services. And I think at last count, British Columbia was nearing about 5 million people. So it's a significant number of people that we serve, and we do serve them in a number of different ways. So we have our curbside, where the majority of people have access to the most convenient form of recycling, where they can put their items at the curb. They also have access to depots, and we're going to get into that in the collection. So I don't want to steal the show there, but you're going to hear more about the curbside and the depot collection methods. And we also have multifamily. So we do all of those across the province.
Great, thank you for that. There's a question that's coming on depots, but we'll, as you say, David, we'll take that later. I wondered whether you could reflect more on the fees paid. So does the consumer, homeowner / resident pay a fee for the recyclables collection?
So that's actually a question that we get quite a bit, and I'm glad that that one was asked as well, because it helps us define the system a little bit more. So in British Columbia, we have a number of EPR programs. I think at last count, it was somewhere in the vicinity of 26 to 27 EPR programs. And most of those operate with visible fees, or in some cases, non-visible fees. And some of them operate with deposit system. In the case of Recycle BC, it is entirely funded by the producers who are putting the packaging and paper products into the marketplace. And so the producers are the ones who are bearing the cost. It transfers the responsibility away from the taxpayer onto the producers who are putting those materials into the marketplace.
Great, thank you. And thinking a little bit about collaboration, do you ever partner with foreign companies or companies generally in research and development?
So that's a good question. I mean, certainly we are partnering with a number of companies since we've started. There are producers who have approached us to learn more about the recycling system, how their materials impact the recycling system, learn more about any changes that they can make to their materials. So there is that work that does take place. We certainly run pilots that take a significant amount of effort, but can also yield some pretty interesting results. And the Center for Material Intelligence, which again, I don't want to jump ahead too much because I'll steal the show. But our new Center for Material Intelligence that Tamara mentioned is a center that is not only dedicated to auditing our materials, but is also available to companies who are interested in learning more about the system and learning more about some of what we have been able to figure out when it comes to recycling. So we are looking to partner with other organizations or companies who see that there might be some benefits to working with us.
Great, thank you. We've got questions coming in thick and fast. I think some of them are sort of going to be relevant for later in your presentation, so I'll hold off asking them. But I think one of the kind of interesting questions is around, in your presentation, you talked about targets and whether COVID impacts mean that you've been adjusting those targets. And relatedly, have you noticed any sort of difference on kind of recycling products in the waste stream since the BC kind of US borders closed?
So that's such a great question, and it's actually one that we've been getting quite a bit, I'm sure you can imagine. In terms of targets, I would say that the first thing that we're quite proud of at Recycle BC is that we were able to maintain our operations throughout all of COVID. Curbside recycling continued uninterrupted across the province, except for one small remote community. And in that particular community, there was a COVID outbreak that forced them to stop collection for a 2-week period. But otherwise, we had curbside collection operating right through the pandemic and to this day. Certainly the province of British Columbia saw the importance of recycling. They designated recycling an essential service. We did see some interruption of service at some of our depot locations. The majority of them did manage to stay open, but there were a few that needed to temporarily close. For the most part, those businesses just needed to get a better sense of how they were going to operate under perhaps new restrictions when it came to access, making sure that their communities were going to be safe. And we're happy to say that all of our depots are open and collecting materials right now.
Great, thank you. I think we've got time for 2 more questions. Just so everyone knows, there's a voting function, and so questions which rise to the top kind of catch my attention more than others. So I'm going to ask a question about service in rural areas or for service to First Nations. Do you have any statistics that you can paint a picture of availability of curbside versus depots? If you're going to cover it later on, we can take that later on.
It is something that we're going to cover later on. So if it's all right, I'd like to hold off on that question. And then once we've presented, we are going to specifically present on work that we do to engage with First Nations. We're really quite proud of the work that we've done in that area. And we're going to be able to talk a little bit about servicing the remote areas in British Columbia as well. So maybe we can revisit that question once we've presented on those topics. And if the question is still relevant, we'd be happy to answer it.
Great. And one final question. Before we head into the break, if the producers are worldwide producers, so think sort of global brands like PepsiCo or Coca-Cola, etc., how are they and why are they willing to pay more to do this in BC and not anywhere else?
So, I mean, you'd have to talk to each individual business to find out what their ethics are and why they are supportive. What we can say is that we do see significant support among large producers. Large producers, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody on this presentation that large producers have made some pretty significant commitments of their own around recycled content, around incorporating recyclable material, and around sustainability in general. And I think that, the senators actually mentioned it earlier, that this is something that is definitely gathering a lot of attention. And I think a lot of companies at this point are recognizing that there is an opportunity here to do the right thing and to also reap some rewards as well.
Great, thank you. And with that, I know we've got lots of questions, but I have to keep us to time. And so we're going to go into a break. I think we were planning on 10 minutes, but I wonder whether we could all go make a cup of tea and have a scone or something in 7 minutes. So if I can give everyone 7 minutes and be back by 11:20, that would be great.
Sounds good.
Kind of take part 2. And so, David, are you ready to go on to collection and marketing, chapter 2?
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm actually super pleased to be able to stop talking I'm going to reintroduce two of our team members. So the first person who you're going to hear from is going to be Jordan Best. He is our Director of Collection, followed by Lindsay Shohan, our Director of Marketing. So with that, over to you, Jordan.
Okay, thank you, Dave. So I'm going to describe our collection activities for you today. Recycle BC provides access to recycling services through a multi-channel approach to collection, and we're responsible for providing collection of packaging and paper across the entire province of BC, and we've been doing that since our program launched in 2014. As Tamara mentioned, we collect our material in 3 streams. Curbside collection, which is a collection from households that set material out individually for pickup at the curb. So generally this is single family homes where the collection stops at each home, generally weekly, but also bi-weekly in some communities. Multifamily collection, so collection from a central location and residences with 5 or more units, generally shared recycling containers and complexes such as apartment buildings, condominiums, etc. And also depots. We have over 230 depots across the province, rural areas, urban areas, and everything in between, where residents drop off their material. Those locations allow the collection of materials such as plastic bags and foam that are simply not compatible with curbside and multifamily collection, but also in smaller communities that are too small, where that curbside collection just doesn't make sense in them. Those depots act as locations for residents in those smaller communities to recycle. We have collection agreements with local governments, private companies, First Nations, and not-for-profit companies. When our program was formed, essentially each of those organizations had the option to participate in our program as a contracted collection partner or to operate their existing collection programs independently of our program. And now, 6 years later, there's extremely small amount of local governments that have continued to choose to do that. The vast majority are now included in our program. So all collectors sign a master services agreement and a statement of work that outlines their contractual obligations to Recycle BC. And on behalf, as they provide those services to us, we then provide payment to them as outlined in their statement of work. So all curbside and multifamily collectors collect a standard material list, either weekly or bi-weekly from the homes in their service area. They deliver that material to a facility that we have designated to them, and there's no charge for them to deliver that material. We pay them per household per year, and we have a strict 3% contamination limit on the amount of contamination that they can have in their program, and I'll speak in a couple minutes about what that means. And depot collectors also collect a standard list, although each depot has a choice whether they collect all of the materials included in our program, paper, plastic, metal, foam, plastic bags, etc., or whether, if they're in a community that has curbside collection, whether they want to accept only the materials that are only accepted at depots, such as plastic bags and foam packaging. And unlike curbside multifamily collectors, we pay depots per ton based on the amount and type of material that they collect. So since launching our program, we have continued to grow. From 2014 to 2019, we've increased the number of households that have curbside collection under our program by 11%. Multifamily has increased by 8%. We've almost doubled the number of depots in our program. And as Tamara alluded to earlier, many of the materials that are collected in our program were simply not collected in BC prior to the launch of our program, or if they were, it was a very haphazard way scattered across the province. So materials like coffee cups, cartons, plastic bags, and foam, residents just simply didn't have options for recycling those materials in many communities, and now that's standardized across the entire province. Our 2019 annual report gives some high-level statistics. So 98.6% of households across the province have access to our depots. So we are servicing a massive geographic area. Obviously, a lot of those depots are centered in urban areas, but we also service many rural and remote areas as well. And we service 1.85 million households of a population of 4.6 million through that services. And we have 176 communities across British Columbia that have curbside and multifamily collection. So this is sort of a cutout of one half of a resident guide that would be mailed to all residents within a certain community that explains how to recycle at their curb. So this is an example of what we would call a multi-stream program, where the residents are asked to set their paper out separately, the paper and cardboard in yellow bag, from their containers in a blue box, and their glass. So this would be an example like the city of Vancouver, the largest municipality in British Columbia, that have a 3-stream system: paper, containers, and glass. We also have many communities across BC that we refer to in the collection world as single stream, where paper and containers are mixed together, say in an automated cart or even in blue boxes. So there is a difference. Many communities, about half, have multi-stream by population, but the other half have single stream. But what's consistent across the whole province is that the plastic bags, the foam packaging, and the other flexible plastic packaging are always accepted at depots. And glass can differ. Some communities do collect segregated glass as part of curbside or multifamily, but some do not, and instead direct it to depots. So in terms of the actual dollars, we outline our approach to financial incentives in our program plan. The BC recycling regulation essentially requires us to adequately provide for the producers of packaging and paper, collecting and paying the costs of collecting and managing those materials. So we aim to set fair and reasonable incentives for packaging and paper collection services. At the end of each generally a few-year term that we have in our contracts with collectors, we develop a new set of financial incentives that we propose to collectors in conjunction with a new service agreement. And our plan outlines the process for establishing those, the methodologies we use, various cost studies, et cetera, to determine what those rates will be. So I won't get into all the numbers, but suffice to say, we've outlined what the rates are that we pay curbside, local governments, as an example, cities, municipalities. It ranges from $33 a household per year to $42. If it's multi-stream, we pay a higher rate. If the density of a community is lower, we pay a higher rate, things like that. So it does vary the amount we pay based on the type of community. In terms of multifamily, it's a little simpler. We have 2 rates, one for multi-stream households, one for single stream. All of our incentive rates are posted on our website. So it's the standard incentives that apply to all collectors, as well as their competitors if it's a private company. So it's very transparent, and collectors know that they're all being treated equally. Depots, as I mentioned earlier, we do pay per ton based on the type of material. We pay slightly higher in communities that do not have curbside collection for the materials that will also be accepted at curbside, because in those instances, residents have the option whether to use the service at their home or whether to take the material to a depot. Some materials we do pay an additional amount if the material is baled, as that provides some transportation services or savings for us. So the rates range from on the lower end per ton to $60 a ton for paper and cardboard if it's in a community that has curbside collection. Of course, that material is quite dense and heavy, all the way up to $800 a ton for foam collection, which is obviously lower density and lighter weight. Contamination is a major focus of our program. We really carefully monitor and work on the contamination rates under our program with all of our collectors. Contamination can be understood essentially as material that's been erroneously included in recycling by residents. That might be a material that's simply not accepted in the first place because it's not packaging and paper. We see yard waste, clothing, wood, toys, electronics, you name it, we've seen it. Could be contaminated packaging or paper. So something that is accepted in our program, but's been contaminated in some way. So example would be a plastic tub of peanut butter that's still full of peanut butter. Hazardous materials, probably the one that's most concerning to us. That could be things like propane tanks, lithium batteries, medical sharps, things that can be very problematic from a health and safety perspective. Missorted material can also be problematic. So we do, as we've mentioned a few times, accept plastic bags and foam, but those can really only be effectively recycled if they're collected as a segregated stream at a depot. So when it's mixed in at curbside, which does happen, unfortunately, and something we'll work with all of our collectors, it creates challenges. Why do we focus so much on contamination? It's really because we want to continue to be able to access recycling markets that other jurisdictions simply have not been able to. And in order to be able to access those markets, we need a premium material. Contamination can also pose significant health and safety concerns to collection and sorting staff. Again, if you think of something like a medical sharp or propane tanks that can cause fires on trucks and sorting facilities, and unfortunately that does happen. We also can access North American end markets, as my colleague Sam will get into, if we have good quality material. And we're also able to reduce the program cost charged to our producers if we're ensuring that the material being collected is only our material, so to speak, and not material that shouldn't be there in the first place. So we work with all of our collectors on what we call contamination remediation plans. On that, we really want to see all collectors applying the 5 elements of a strong plan. Promotion and education being the first. That could range from mail outs, door hangers, bus shelter ads, social media campaigns, everything in between. Monitoring strategies by collection supervisors to make sure they're actually getting there out on the streets, observing their drivers, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Training of collection staff is very important, but probably the one we focused on the most is enforcement. That essentially boils down to collection drivers tagging and leaving material behind on the curb if it includes an unacceptable level of contamination. And we also use a lot of data to track the challenges and improvements, work with the collectors, see how their rates have changed over time, see how the various strategies that they're doing implement things, etc. We find you really need to focus on all 5 elements of those that plan in order to reduce contamination. So this slide really gets into what the average contamination rates for our program are. To the left, you'll see the difference between curbside and multifamily and depot. What's really interesting, and we just have so much data on this through our program, is how much program design impacts contamination rates. So we do see significantly higher rates of contamination in single stream programs compared to multi-stream. But we also see really significant differences in contamination rate based on the collection container type that is used. So on one end of the spectrum, the highest rates of contamination by far are single stream programs that use automated carts. And on the low end of the spectrum are multi-stream programs that use open top blue boxes. It's just simply so much easier for drivers to see what's in a blue box that's not supposed to be in there, and they can tag, they can pull things out, etc., compared to an automated cart where the driver is not even getting out of their truck and it is not interacting with the material at all. So on that note, I'm going to pass things off to my colleague, Lindsay.
Great, thank you so much, Jordan. I'm going to share with you information about our provincial as well as our more local marketing communications activities. So we really have 2 main objectives. One is to increase resident awareness of the program and its features and benefits, that they can recycle at home or at depots. And second is to engage and encourage residents to make informed and correct decisions about how they recycle packaging and paper. So how does it work? There's certainly targeted communications we do in some communities, and those are namely the 16 communities that we service directly, but we're also able to do broader province-wide resident promotion and education as well. There's a few key reasons that we're able to do this on a provincial scale. These are really the same things we've talked about previously in the presentation related to collection system design. So namely what residents can recycle and where residents can recycle. It's all consistent across the province, as well as reasons related to post-collection, which Sam will talk a little bit more about later, but like having one system across the province and knowing what happens to residents' materials for end markets. So whether residents live in Victoria on the island, Prince George in the north, or Osoyoos in the south, Okanagan, we can speak to those things on a broad basis. And our provincial activities support and complement those of the collectors and what the collectors are doing on a more local level. So all our collectors are also doing promotion and education, and they're speaking directly to their residents. And so what we want to really enhance and complement what they're doing with some of our broader messages. We connect with residents in a number of different ways, varying levels of messaging depending on the objectives. So we use traditional and new media for education and awareness campaigns. You can see a few examples here on the slide. One example is related to hazardous waste. So we were seeing fires in some of our receiving facilities, and we did a province-wide campaign on hazardous materials, really focusing on single-use propane canisters, as well as lithium-ion batteries and butane canisters, but generally all of the hazardous materials. And that was supported by video content as well as media relations activities. We also partner with organizations that can amplify our promotion and education activities. So like the Vancouver Canucks, like the Vancouver Whitecaps, but also with smaller, more community-based organizations focused on local recycling promotion and education through our Community Champions program. And we also connect with residents in person. So we have a community outreach team. Each year they travel around BC to educate residents at various events, festivals throughout the province. Unfortunately, that didn't happen this year for obvious reasons, but we definitely look forward to getting back out in the field and connecting with residents directly so they can ask the questions in a one-on-one format and really dive deep into the information that they're looking for, and we can help educate residents further. And these things don't exist independent of each other. We integrate them to increase impact whenever we can. So for example, our community outreach team activates at the Vancouver Whitecaps game, pre-game on the plaza, where the celebration plaza. And you'll see one of our campaigns here has a hockey theme and featured plastic bottles and jars wearing Vancouver Canucks jerseys. So we really try and cross promote whenever we can. And now for fun, I want to share with you one of our videos. This is also a television spot. It's in market now. And the campaign really focuses on nature and our wildlife and the positive impact residents can have on our environment.
Well, we recycle, right? We keep our environment healthy and our wildlife happy. Are you recycling all you can? Find out at recyclebc.ca.
So in addition to those examples of education and awareness, we also provide information to residents through our website, our blog, our social media channels on a provincial basis. And we also have our material list and all our provincial depot locations on our web and app-based search tool. Operations support is also a key marketing communications function. For the 16 communities we serve directly, we create all the resident education materials, including the recycling guides, the OOP stickers or contamination tags, and any other outreach or campaign that we do. We also provide signage and brochures to our depot network for consistency and clarity to residents. So the materials we produce and that we use in market, we also make available to our collectors. So we have an online secure portal on our website. So anything from campaign materials like social media posts, sample posts with graphics, to recycling guide and signage templates are available for our collectors to download and use in their communities, and they can customize those so they work best for them in their communities with their residents. Another thing we do is annual consumer research. So this provides insights on residents' recycling attitudes and behaviors, as well as Recycle BC awareness and perception. So we use it for measurement, but we also use it to inform future promotion and education activities. Now I'd like to show you our first of 3 videos that show how the program works. And this one is focused on collection.
We built our collection network through purpose, partnership, and performance. We empower residents through an innovative and integrated recycling system designed to make a positive environmental impact. Recycling is, as the name suggests, a cycle. In order to be effective, every part in the recycling process must be seamlessly and simply linked together. Residents sort their materials and place them at the curb. From the curb, local governments or contracted collectors pick up recycling and transport it to one of our receiving facilities around the province. At the receiving facility, each load is weighed, and the information is transferred to a sophisticated data analysis system, so we know exactly how much material and the type of material we are collecting from each community.
It's really taking ownership of the entire process for the province. We look after collection. We have people in the field on the ground checking what's going into those trucks. We have people at the receiving facilities looking at the material there. We actively manage.
But it starts here, in the home. Recycle BC has one of the largest lists of accepted materials in North America. It's consistent across the province, reducing confusion and making it easier for residents to understand, regardless of where in BC they live. We give them this information through advertising campaigns, recycling guides, our website, social media, community outreach, and directly through our collectors. We also have an app that makes it easy for residents to find out what items can be recycled and where. The way residents sort household waste and where it goes depends on how it can best be recycled effectively. We know some materials can impact the recyclability of others. The majority of materials are collected at the curb, but there are a few select materials that residents need to take to the depot. We hire collection companies through a competitive tender process to collect on our behalf in some communities. In most communities, local governments still choose to provide collection service.
The Capital Regional District contracts with Recycle BC to provide residential recycling services throughout the Capital Region. That includes the curbside recycling program as well as the recycling depots. Prior to that, the Capital Regional District was on its own to provide those services. We bore the financial burden, the risk of the markets for recyclable materials, as well as having challenges with ensuring program consistency between us and our neighboring communities as well. Recycle BC's program provides financial stability, certainty, and consistency, which is a benefit to not only the Capital Region, but every regional district and local government throughout the province of BC. In addition, Recycle BC has shown remarkable flexibility with meeting local needs, and we think it's a win-win.
Recycle BC contracts with local waste collection companies, and we can do collection for multifamily buildings, or we can do collection for single-family residences in different municipalities throughout British Columbia. Well, the impact on our business when we started with Recycle BC was it had a positive impact. We were able to offer a quality program, and we were able to be compensated by Recycle BC. And it didn't limit us to just offering the programs for mixed containers and for mixed waste paper. We could still work directly with the multifamily buildings providing other services or enhanced services, and then even contracting with the buildings directly for organics and waste. So the advantage of the EPR model is it offers a consistent program. Prior to that, within British Columbia, we had all different types of recycling programs. And when Recycle BC came, it offered one program that everybody understood how to use. So really synergized the program.
The items that can't be collected at the curb, plastic bags and overwrap, foam packaging, and our new category of flexible plastic packaging, can be brought to one of our over 200 partner depots across BC, where residents can drop off packaging and paper free of charge.
I operate a recycling depot in West Kelowna called Planet Earth Recycling. What I have found is that by making this into an EPR program, it improves participation level from consumers' point of view. It cleans up the streams of materials by having a depot model accompanied with a curbside model. I would say the impact that the Recycle BC program has had on our business is it has brought us a lot more customers. Before Recycle BC came along, a lot of the materials that we pick up or that we collect under that program, we had to market ourselves based on the commodity markets. So one of the best things about having that type of material under an EPR program is it provides stability in the pricing that we get as a business to collect and handle this material. If it wasn't for Recycle BC and that consistent rate that we get for the commodities that we deal with, then we would have a hard time continuing to operate, quite frankly.
Recycle BC's collection system connects residents, communities, and the waste industry.
The biggest lesson that we have learned today is that you can't do it alone. You can't just walk in and impose something. You have to work with all of your stakeholders. You have to work with municipalities, with First Nations, with our stewards, the producers, and you create something together.
We have designed a collection system here in BC that is among the best in the world, contributing to 90% of our materials being managed by recycling. It is a system that was created to protect the things we have in common, the land, water, and air that we all share. We are doing our part to make sure that when residents do their part, it will make a difference for generations to come.
Hi, thanks for that. We've got lots and lots of questions, so if it's okay, Lindsay, just going to dive into them. So we've had quite a few questions around the kind of depot concept, and so I'm going to sort of group a few together in this question. I wonder whether you could just reflect on sort of the decision to kind of make the depots free. Was that to encourage sort of people to come along and use them? How many are there, and how accessible are they? And you know, how do you get to incentivize or encourage people to go that extra mile to use them?
So there's a few questions there. I'll try to answer all of them. I think the first thing that we need to make sure is abundantly clear is the entire program is free to use by residents. So whether it's curb, multifamily, or depots, all of those services are things that people can use as they wish. And we actually encourage and hope that they will use it as much as possible. Certainly it's all about trying to recover as much material as we possibly can. In terms of the breadth of our depot network, it's actually a vast depot network that spans across the entire province. We currently have, I believe, somewhere in the vicinity of about 230 depots across the entire province. And in addition to that, we also have return to retail locations. So one of our more prominent companies here in British Columbia accepts some of the materials that the depot would accept. And so you can just drop those off when you go to that particular retailer and do your shopping. So we actually have a number of different drop-off locations for people to bring those materials. We try to make it as convenient as possible. And I think one of the biggest messages that we share with residents is that it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't actually have to be a trip to the depot that you're doing just to do that. Typically what we hope people will do is they'll combine a trip to the depot with some of their other associated errands that they're running, whether it is to go out to a store to pick up some items. You can always drop off your items on the way.
And then just a quick follow-up. So thinking about the difference between depots and curbside services, does flexible plastic end up in curbside garbage if residents don't take it to the depot?
So that's a good question. I mean, certainly we are doing our best to encourage people to use the recycling service that we have. And when you actually look at some of the challenges of incenting people to recycle flexible plastics specifically, it is certainly a challenge. It's a challenge that exists around the world, certainly in Canada, certainly in North America. When we look at our recovery rates for flexible plastics, we actually have pretty significant recovery. I believe that total for flexible plastics, I believe, was somewhere in the 30% range. Total was around 54%, but don't quote me on that. I would encourage everybody to go to our website. We publish all of this information in our annual report, and you'll get the exact details there.
So just on that incentive question, have you seen that producers have designed better, more recyclable packaging? Have you seen it work in practice?
So we've certainly worked with some producers who have shown an interest in how they can adapt their materials to make them more recyclable. And we've seen producers who have actually taken action as a result of that work. They've adjusted the types of materials that they use in order to ensure that their materials will be more compatible with the recycling system that we are operating. It is a bit of a challenge when we are a province, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, that is exceptionally vast geographically, but we still have a fairly small population. I think I mentioned that Washington State has 50% more people than British Columbia. So there is a scale element to the question that you've just asked. When we talk about full producer responsibility, BC is one market, and there are obviously a number of markets that producers are making packaging for. So I think the true answer is, as we see more and more jurisdictions looking at full producer responsibility and perhaps moving in that direction, there may be a greater impetus for scale and for some of those decisions to be made.
So just sticking for a moment on the sort of producer cost side, did you see producers fund kind of startup costs as well? So thinking about kind of new infrastructure and technology when you set up the system. And then if you could just give a little bit more on the sort of how you incentivize to fund the program. So, you know, how you might alter fees, for example, in order to incentivize kind of more kind of sustainable design.
Yeah, so I think the first answer to your question is in terms of how the program itself is funded. And so as Tamara mentioned, we have approximately 1,200 businesses that fund us, and they pay the total costs of the program. Now, in terms of how that is allocated, we obviously have systems in place where we can determine exactly how much material is being brought into the system that's being supplied. And then we determine what the costs are of managing that material on a material specific level. And each individual producer must report in what their total supplied quantities are by material type. And then they end up paying their share of the costs of the system. And one of the key factors in our program is how we've made a decision, producers specifically have made a decision, that there would be no cross-subsidization when it comes to the commodity revenues that are attributable to the collection. So only those materials that receive commodity revenues will benefit from those commodity revenues, and that is redistributed through our fee setting process.
Great. So then moving on to talk about contamination, there's been lots of questions sort of related to that. I wondered whether you could sort of reflect on, you know, when, you know, the collection systems that you have with partners, are they essentially kind of separated out in a standard way? So is it sort of like a 3-bin system? And then related to that, do you see kind of significant contamination rate improvement as more kind of boxes or streams are added?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Jordan touched a little bit on that. So we definitely see better contamination numbers when we collect in multi-stream. So several different boxes, you have your containers, your paper, and your glass. It is really up to the local government whether or not they choose to go with single stream or multi-stream. We pay an incentive rate based on the collection method that they choose. And if they choose single stream, which has a higher contamination rate, then that incentive rate is actually lower. So certainly we see things in terms of contamination in that regard. One of the key things that we do is every couple of years, we bring together all of our collectors at a collector conference. And that's a really powerful tool we've found, where we can bring together these collectors, some of whom are struggling with contamination issues, and some of whom maybe have struggled, but have really charted a path towards better contamination numbers. And then we have the stars, those who are doing exceptionally well when it comes to contamination. And it creates this environment where different local governments, different collectors can learn from each other. They do presentations about the work that they are doing in order to better understand what's working, what's not working, get good ideas about how we can drive down contamination. I said at the beginning, it takes everybody involved, everybody engaged to make this system work. And the collector conference is a perfect example where we get all of these different stakeholders together, and they're just doing amazing work sharing information.
And then just as a quick follow-up on that, so this conference that gets together, how much government involvement is there kind of in the sort of like collaboration of kind of, you know, how you work with and with producers generally?
So it depends on what kind of government you're talking about. On the provincial level, we certainly work very closely with provincial government to help them understand the work that we're doing. We submit a program plan for review, and the provincial government has to decide whether or not to approve that program plan or ask for some changes. When it comes to local governments, we're working with them very closely. We have a field team that is out in the field meeting with our collectors, whether it be depots, whether it be local governments, talking to them about the challenges that they're facing. I think we've already spoken a little bit about some of those audits that we do. I think we mentioned that we do about 1,800 material audits a year. And that's really fascinating, because the benefit of that is we get a really good sense of what some of the challenges are in different communities. We can provide report cards to different communities if they're experiencing really significant challenges when it comes to contamination. I personally was in a community a couple of weeks ago speaking to some counselors and some local government representatives about some of the challenges that they were facing, and also hearing about some of the work that they were doing to remediate the problem.
Great. I think we've got time for one more question before moving on to the next section. I'm going to combine them slightly. Picking up this idea about how the signal gets sent back to the producers, are you seeing the amount of packaging and paper they put into the system kind of is being reduced in order to reduce their costs on the back end? Do you think that signal is strong for them? And then sort of relatedly, is there a rejection or segregation for non-partner products?
Sorry, I don't understand the second part.
So the question is there rejection or segregation for non-partner products? So I guess,
in the collection stream?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe the first question that I can answer is when we actually look at producers and what is making them make changes, we always are very cautious to suggest that an EPR program alone will incent a change like the one that you are describing. Is it a factor? Perhaps. But the reality is that producers are making decisions about what kind of packaging to use based on a whole host of different factors. Certainly there are marketing considerations. I spoke a little bit earlier about some of the commitments that producers are making. There are many large producers that are signatories to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, New Plastics Economy. So there's a lot of factors that are at play, and we have to be very careful that we don't suggest that EPR is the overarching decision why a producer might choose to change their packaging. But certainly, as I mentioned, we have worked with some producers directly about the packaging that they're using. And we do have examples here in the province of British Columbia where producers have perhaps changed the types of packaging that they're using. Certainly, we've seen some producers shift from plastic bags to paper bags. These are decisions that they make. Perhaps EPR is part of that. Perhaps there are broader reasons behind it. And I do go back to the question of scale. When we talk about a province like British Columbia, certainly we have achieved a significant amount of scale here in this province. But when we talk about packaging decisions, a lot of those decisions are made at the national level, if not the international level. So we got to be cautious in that regard as well.
Great, thanks. We do have a lot of other questions, but I think they'll fit in quite nicely with the kind of future chapters. And so, David, did you want to move on to the next chapter, so post-collection and markets?
That would be great. And with that, I'm going to introduce Sam Baker. He is our Director of Post-Collection. And this is definitely one of the more exciting parts of the presentation, so I hope you enjoy it.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody. So we're going to get right into it. So we'll start off with the Center for Material Intelligence. So understanding the composition of material received from our residents has been a cornerstone of our program since its inception. And so too is the work we do with our stewards to help them better understand how their packaging behaves in our system. In February of this year, we opened the Center for Material Intelligence, where we were able to bring these two key aspects of our program in-house and under one roof. It is here that our audit team meticulously sorts over 1,800 samples a year to generate the data we require to keep our program running efficiently. It is also here that we engage with stewards, collectors, and other organizations to further the understanding of recycling by focusing on a variety of factors, including stream composition, material and shape-specific properties, and sorting equipment and technology. With room to grow, our intent is to also use the facility to research resident behavior through a public-facing research and development depot, as well as for an education center where residents can come and interact with the recycling process and gain a better understanding of how the system works. So every year we take around 1,800 samples from our inbound material so that we can understand the composition of the material entering our program. These samples are taken from a randomized selection of collectors designed to statistically represent the collection within the province. Samples are sorted into a multitude of categories designed to give valuable feedback to our residents, collectors, and stewards. And every quarter we send out scorecards to our collectors to show them how they performed in the previous quarter. So looking at the audit process, every month a list of random samples are generated and communicated out to all applicable receiving facilities in the network. It will then identify the given truck on the given day as it comes in over the weigh scale and pull it aside to take a sample from the load. With the whole process being filmed, first the truck tips its load onto a clean tip floor. Next, the material is mixed by front end loader to ensure the randomness of the load. Then the material is put into super sack and sealed with a zip tie, which includes the tracking number corresponding to the collector and sample. The super sack is then transported to the Center for Material Intelligence, where it is sorted into detailed categories. Each category is weighed and entered into our system. Finally, the data is made available in our reporting system and can be accessed at any time to determine key metrics such as contamination rate by stream, collector, and collection container type. So a good example of the types of projects we get involved in at the Center for Material Intelligence is the Resi Chain pilot from BASF, currently piloting. They're working with several stakeholders to understand the potential of an embedded tracer in the plastic resin, coupled with a digital twin tracked through blockchain technology. The CMI provides the means to simulate real-world conditions without impacting our operations, and a location where we can bring stakeholders together, and in this case, it was virtual, in an attempt to bring new technologies and processes to life. So we'll move on to the post-collection section, and there'll be an opportunity to ask questions after this. So post-collection is part of the recycling process that happens after the material is collected from the resident's home. It includes receiving of the material after collection, transport of material to material recovery facilities, sorting material into specific grades or types of materials, for example, sorting plastics into the specific resin types, marketing of material as commodities to end markets where they are processed and made into new products or packaging. Post-collection network is made up of a variety of subcontractors and overseen by our post-collection partner, GFL. This province-wide system creates economies of scale, allowing for centralized investment into recycling technologies and infrastructure that benefit the whole network. Consolidated volume also enables better access to end markets. So when Recycle BC launched in 2014, the first post-collection contract went to Green by Nature, which was a partnership between Cascades Recovery, Impera Environmental, and Merlin Plastics. They designed a centralized network around 11 preconditioning facilities to sort single stream and OCC, so cardboard, excuse me, and a container recovery facility operated by Merlin Plastics to sort all the containers. These were the days when China had a ferocious appetite for recovered fiber, so there was little capacity considered to sort mixed paper. This contract came to an end in May 2020. So in anticipation of this date, in 2019, we launched a competitive tender process to go back out to the marketplace and find the next post-collection partner. Given the dramatic change in the recycling market in 2017, 2018 proved to be a good year to start the process of evaluating and creating the next post-collection RFP. We performed market soundings with companies both local and across North America to understand how to best build the RFP and attract world-class responses. In March 2019, we released the RFP, which focused on 5 key outcomes: investment in recycling infrastructure, system efficiency with minimal redundancy, prioritization of local end markets, clear and transparent business processes, and ongoing innovation and technology. As a result of the process, GFL, known as Green for Life, was the successful respondent and began as a post-collection partner in May 2020.
Hi, Sam. Sorry to interrupt you. I wonder whether you could just speak up a little. Some people are having difficulty kind of picking up your voice. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So looking at the highlights, the design of GFL's network reflects the current state of collection and the recycling markets while remaining flexible to market fluctuations and changes. Their investment of $25 million includes a major overhaul of a single stream MRF, brand new container recovery facility, and a brand new fiber sorting facility, the likes of which never existed in our program before. Result of this investment are plastics that continue to stay local and a dramatic reduction in the amount of fiber being sent overseas for recycling, keeping it instead here in the Pacific Northwest and supporting a local circular economy. We have 38 facilities in our network across the province, including 2 material recovery facilities near Vancouver, one in Richmond, one in New Westminster, where the material is sorted and prepared for market. The material flows from these receiving facilities through the province down to Metro Vancouver. For materials such as glass, where there are end markets nearby, these will go straight from the receiving facility where they were received, thus reducing GHG emissions as much as possible. We begin to track our material the minute it moves over the weigh scale. Every ton by each collector is recorded in our system until it is received by an approved end market. This ensures we maintain the chain of custody for the material in our program. As mentioned, the 2 primary material recovery facilities are either completely new or underwent a major retrofit. Now with the latest sorting technology, they have the ability to sort our material into a multitude of grades. To ensure we can access local end markets, not only do we need to be able to make the right commodities, but we also need to produce them to very high levels of purity. Domestic fiber mills have a much lower level of acceptable contamination than the newer Chinese mills, so having the ability to sort and clean our already clean multi-stream paper in a standalone building gives us a very high quality product desirable in the marketplace. With these 2 facilities receiving the majority of the curbside and multifamily collection vehicles from Metro Vancouver, in addition to a significant amount of depot material, they have been optimized to move trucks through with minimum wait times. The importance of an efficient and robust reporting system cannot be overstated to ensure this process goes off without a hitch. So what does GFL's investment in the post-collection network mean? Ultimately, it means we were able to keep more material local, resulting in better environmental outcomes. So it starts with the new ability to sort paper into grades suitable for the North American market, and the ability to remove contaminants, resulting in higher quality commodities to market. This enhances our access to local end markets, allowing us to focus primarily on markets in the Pacific Northwest, reducing our reliance on overseas markets, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and supporting a local circular economy. These are all very significant environmental outcomes that take us well beyond the status quo. Next, we have our video kind of showing an overview of our post-collection system.
Residents trust us to manage their recycling materials responsibly. They've done their part. Now it's up to us to continue to do ours. We built a post-collection system focused on environmental outcomes. Our province is vast, close to 1 million square kilometers. So there is an extensive post-collection network of 38 facilities to serve every collector in the program and process the collected materials.
Right now we're in Richmond, British Columbia. It's a facility that we've designed for the Recycle BC post-collection program. What we have is we've designed through two different buildings. We've designed a fiber sorting facility as well as a neighboring facility that deals with container processing. So your non-fiber grades, your metals and your plastics and your glass.
We didn't build these facilities located around BC. We partnered, prioritizing local businesses and ensuring plenty of opportunities to participate.
Urban Impact is a commercial recycling collector. We do waste recycling and shredding collection services for customers, and we also run
Residents trust us to manage.
certainly turn for me to be recognizing that it's a fantastic opportunity to serve.
From the receiving facilities with materials weighed, recorded, and sampled for audits, it's off to one of our material recovery facilities for processing. These modern facilities process over 200,000 tons of packaging and paper every year, using state-of-the-art equipment, ensuring the highest grade of material possible. This, in turn, allows us to access the best markets possible while keeping the majority of materials local in British Columbia and North America.
So when we designed the system for this program, I think it was important that we design the system thinking about the future. We wanted to design a system that was flexible, that could meet the changing needs of different recycling end markets. We wanted to design a system that could be flexible to deal with composition changes while still achieving all the recovery rates and recycling rates that Recycle BDC, our client, desired. So in our facilities that we designed with flexibility in mind, optical sortation was very important. So even on fiber grades that have maybe traditionally were sorted mechanically through screens, we're sorting it using optical technology. Meaning if the composition of fiber were to go up or down, we could utilize these opticals to sort in a more efficient manner.
We can't improve things unless we can measure them. So as part of our post-collection process, we have created robust procedures to audit, measure, and report on the efficiency of our collection systems. At the receiving facilities, we take highly controlled random samples and send them to our Center for Material Intelligence, where we perform approximately 1,800 audits every year to understand material composition and where we have issues with contamination. We share information with collectors to support resident education. It's here where we also conduct our studies and pilot programs.
We launched the Center for Material Intelligence as a place where we could do studies to advance recycling systems in British Columbia and throughout Canada. It's primarily an audit facility, but it's also a place where we can do studies to inform our fee setting process to make sure that costs are being fairly allocated to producers and to the materials that they're supplying into the marketplace. It's a facility that we can use to test the flow of materials and how they interact with each other in the system, and to help producers ultimately make decisions about what they're going to introduce as packaging innovation into the marketplace, and understanding how those packages are going to interact with the system and whether they will be recyclable or not.
Our post-collection system was created with intent. We were very deliberate in the direction and purpose of our competitive tender for post-collection services. We provided the framework, provided clear expectations, and then let industry do what industry does best: make things efficient, innovate, respond to what the markets are demanding.
So when we were looking for a new post-collection partner, we went through a competitive tender process and focused on 5 key outcomes: investment in recycling infrastructure, system efficiency with minimal redundancy, prioritization of local end markets, clear and transparent business processes, and ongoing innovation and technology.
I think Recycle BC, when looking for a post-collection partner, I think it was probably important for Recycle BC to be working with a company that was at the cutting edge of the recycling industry, that was looking for innovative ways to increase recycling rates, and someone that had the bandwidth to manage such a very important large contract.
To continue to be a leader in extended producer responsibility, we continually innovate for our residents, our collectors, and for the 1,200 producers who fund our program. We focus on efficient systems, effective technology, robust measurement, and a talented and committed team. And we do this so we can get the best results.
Okay, we'll move on to end markets now. So as I've mentioned several times before, we're very focused on keeping our material as local as possible. We must also ensure that our material is being responsibly recycled. So we must approve every end market that our post-collection partner wishes to send material to. This due diligence entails visits to end markets to fully understand the life cycle of our materials. Sharing what we see and learn on these visits greatly helps to establish trust in our program and gives collectors and residents the confidence that the material placed in the blue box will be responsibly recycled. All plastics collected in our program are processed at Merlin Plastics in Delta, BC, where they are turned into pellets to be recycled into new packaging and products. Merlin has been the end market for plastics since the inception of the program. GFL's new fiber recovery facility opened up more domestic end markets for fiber in the Pacific Northwest by producing higher grades of paper with less contamination. We're happy to say that the majority of our fiber now remains in the Pacific Northwest, with several overseas end markets taking up the remainder. Metal containers have been sold to end markets in BC, Ontario, and the United States since the inception of the program, and are recycled into new packaging and sheet metal. Thanks to the collection of expanded polystyrene as a segregated stream in our depot network, it is clean enough to be densified and exported to Asia, where it is turned into picture frames and crown molding and sold back to us here in North America. Finally, glass that is collected in our program is sold to end markets in BC to be processed into new bottles, sandblast material, and construction aggregate. And I think next we have a little video on end markets.
It's been said that knowledge is everything, and we agree. That's why it matters to us that when our material leaves the material recovery facility, we know where it's going, to be processed responsibly, and ultimately back into residents' homes, supporting a circular economy.
Well, the circular economy it's really a different way of thinking about an economic system. It's one where resources continue to be used through multiple life cycles. And it's in the recycling that you would recover the resources to put back into the production process so they can be used again and go right back into that circular loop. But that's continuous, designing waste out of the system.
So when this goes to this, to this, to this, to this, what happens next matters. We have a local BC end market for plastic and glass, and metal and most of the paper also stay in Canada and North America. We approve and verify each of our end markets, keeping material as local as possible whenever we can.
Local end markets are really important. We want to work with someone who's really invested in finding Pacific Northwest markets for our material. We want to ensure that when we produce a commodity, which is a bale of a type of plastic or a bale of a type of paper, that it is used completely by whomever buys it to put it into the next product or package that they're making. And so for us, it's how to produce the best material that gets the best next life in BC or in the Pacific Northwest.
In our case, when these plastic bales are loaded onto a truck, they're going to a plastic recycling facility, located about 15 minutes down the road. It doesn't get much more local than that. Merlin Plastics is Canada's largest plastics recycler and the 5th largest plastics recycler in North America. Merlin has been our plastic end market since our program inception in 2014. We share their goal to ensure that packaging is effectively recycled and does not end up in our natural environment, namely our land and waterways. And it's through that shared goal we work together to manage our plastic, residents' plastic, responsibly.
Many years ago, end of life was not important. You could package your product in whatever you choose to as a brand owner. Today there's accountability of what's going on, what's happening with your package. Is it compatible with current infrastructure? Is it a recyclable product or not? We're a bridge between a landfill and a new life. We're renewing the uses of discarded packaging. We are very much customer oriented. We try to understand what the customer needs and go by and apply our skills to achieve it. We have also been able to work on optical property above and beyond what a commodity resin could be. So we're able to meet certain demanding criteria that our customer need.
Plastics are used in diverse industries by diverse companies. Companies like Lush Fresh Handmade Cosmetics, who uses recycled plastic from Merlin for their sample black jars, amounting to approximately 100,000 pounds of recycled plastic per year.
Lush uses 100% post-consumer recycled plastics for our plastics packaging, like our block pots, clear bottles, black bottles, sample jars, and caps. Recycled plastics uses only half the energy required compared to using virgin materials. Local sourcing is very important to Lush as it aligns to our core value of making like our block pots, clear bottles, black bottles, sample jars, and caps. Recycled plastics uses only half the energy required compared to using virgin materials. Local sourcing is very important to Lush as it aligns to our core value of making sure we reduce the carbon footprint in all the materials that we're buying, including packaging and raw materials. For our sample jars, we use plastic coming from Merlin Plastics, 100% post-consumer recycled polypropylene plastics, or number 5. Recycling and circular economy is very important to not just companies but for everybody because it drives the habit of recycling and taking care of all the plastics that we see every day in our lives.
And the cycle continues with everyone involved doing their part. We are all on the same fragile planet, and we must do our part and take the time to recycle responsibly. British Columbia continues to be a leader in packaging and paper recycling and EPR system design, which contributes to a circular economy. It's said that you only get out of something what you put into it. By bringing the power of partnership, transparency, flexibility, and innovation together, we have created a new model for recycling systems, one that is good for our communities, our economy, and our environment.
Great, thanks Sam for kind of talking us through kind of end markets in particular, which is obviously an interest of mine, kind of working on kind of market demand as I do. We've got some questions that I might sort of group together if that's okay. And so we'll start with sort of the kind of data kind of side. So it seems from the video for plastic, for example, most of the, if not all of the material goes to a local processor. I wondered if you collect data on what happens next. So what happens after kind of the materials being processed?
So, I mean, Sam would probably be in a better position to answer this. Certainly, like you said, the majority does go just down the road to Merlin Plastics, and it gets reincorporated into a number of different products. I think in the video you saw things like automotive, things like dashboards. And Sam, is there anything else that you'd be able to share?
Yeah, certainly once it gets to the end market, you know, it's their business at that stage as to what they do with that material. We don't track it much beyond that, other than, you know, our due diligence when we go to these end markets and we see what the final products are. So we do a lot of in-person visits. Merlin is very easy as they're just down the road, but we also, you know, if we're shipping stuff to Asia or whatever, I'll personally go out there and look at these facilities and see the product coming in the front door and see what goes out the back door. So obviously they're most interested in high quality product, and that's what we're trying to get them with as little outthrows as possible.
Yeah, and I think a good example that that Sam just mentioned, we visit these different countries, and a good example would be for the foam that we collect. A portion of that foam is sent to a country in Asia that we have visited, and we know exactly what is being made with that particular material.
And so just as a follow-up, do you kind of get involved in sort of end market development then kind of directly? And is that sort of part of the program?
So I don't know that we would say that we get involved directly with end market development. I mean, certainly we are doing work on the other flexible plastic packaging that we are collecting, where we are partnering with Merlin Plastics to find a recycling solution for that. And in the meantime, that material is being diverted from landfill. It's being turned into an engineered fuel, which is used as a commodity, as a replacement for coal in industrial practices. I mean, whether or not you want to call that market development is perhaps a little debatable. But Sam, I wouldn't say that we are very engaged in the creation of markets, are we?
No, but we do have the ability, because we have the entire residential, the material from all of the residential recycling in the province, we have that ability to make a difference if somebody needs that material for sampling, for trialing, you know, if they want to experiment with a new process, we can partner with them, and then we can send them some material to play with. And we kind of have that size and scale where we can help in that regard.
Great. And then sticking with sort of kind of the partnership with Merlin. So thinking about how kind of the prices compared to kind of virgin feedstock, for example, do you sort of get involved in sort of advocating for the benefit of recycled content to make up for the difference in price?
In what way?
Well, you know, given that there is a difference in price between recycled kind of content feedstock and virgin feedstock, do you support businesses to be able to sell into the marketplace more, either through a sort of an environmental claim or kind of like a shared partnership approach?
So we don't have any formal agreements when it comes to, I guess, verifying the material that we collect is going into a particular product, if that's what you're asking. I mean, certainly there are bigger powers at play here when we talk about market forces and the sale of materials.
Great, and really great to see that we've got sort of residents and householders on the call. I wanted to kind of check whether you've got any thoughts on, you know, how often material can be reprocessed. So thinking about the kind of, especially the claim around the circular economy, that we want material to stay in its highest and best use. You know, is there any data that shows how often material that is processed through the BC system kind of returns to the system before it's not be able to be used anymore?
You know, it's a really difficult question to answer, because the reality is that we're not talking about a linear process where you are collecting a particular material, putting it through a recycling process, making a product with that same material, and then recycling that product again. I mean, typically what we are seeing is we would see materials that would go through the process maybe several times, but with other different materials. So it's a very difficult question to answer, Sam. I don't know if you have any further context that you want to provide there.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends where it all ends up, right? If it's made into a durable product, then that would go into a completely different world than packaging and paper stewardship program. You know, the more that we can convert that plastic resin back into food grade resin, and so therefore replacing that virgin stock into packaging, the more opportunities we'll have to cycle that through. And I don't know how many times we can cycle that through. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, but I don't think we're even at that stage where we can, you know, there's enough demand back into packaging to do that. But we are seeing, you know, our Merlin has struck an agreement to kind of significantly improve the amount of food grade packaging it can produce. So they work on an FDA food agency certificate to get that certified, and then that plastic that comes from our system can go back into stewards packaging once more. So that's going to be a big step forward.
And then a quick question on sort of data and tracking. And so I wondered whether you could reflect on the value of blockchain technologies for tracking, and then sort of link to that, how do you track the material that's sort of outside of the recycled stream? So do you use waste characterization studies, for example, on what's in the trash?
So on the blockchain question, I mean, these are still very early days. We are certainly participating in a study on blockchain, but that study is really just getting underway. There is additional information that people would probably be able to get their hands on if they were to visit the BASF website. They would have more information there. Sorry, what was the second question?
So this was on the sort of material that's left over. So do you use waste characterization on sort of what's in the kind of trash stream in order to kind of maybe develop future programs?
So there are certainly waste characterization studies that take place in the province of BC, and we do access some of the results from that to get a better sense of what's happening there. We're also very, very focused just on our own stream. One of our bigger concerns is around making sure that the materials that we collect are recyclable, that we're not seeing a lot of unrecyclable materials or materials that might be considered contamination. That's one of the bigger challenges that we have, because as soon as we have contamination in our stream, it can affect the other materials and their recyclability, and that can actually have a drag on our performance overall.
So just on that, would you mind just sticking with that for a moment to talk about how do you keep up with that? Is your focus on the sort of research, or do you focus on kind of communication with residents?
So it's a number of things, and I think we featured a few of the things in the presentation and in the video. So one of the key elements is the audits that we do. I think it's more than 1,800 audits a year that we do of our material, give us a really good sense of what the composition of the materials is. It can give us insights into what kind of contamination we're seeing. And this is where we talked a little bit about the collaboration that's needed and how there's so many different pieces that need to be threaded together. What we actually see fairly often is marketing has to be very involved in terms of providing information and perhaps creating collateral materials that our local governments can be pushing out, or our depots can be pushing out, in order to help inform residents about the challenges. I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago, I was in a particular community talking to them about some of the challenges that they're facing with contamination. And so there's that ability for us to, number one, because of our system, we're actually able to tell them that they're struggling with contamination, which is something that not all municipalities are able to do. And we're able to quantify it to the point where we can actually say to them, here, this percentage of the contamination is actually linked to flexible plastics or plastic bags. And so we really need you to start communicating to your residents about the challenges that we're seeing here. And then it can become a little bit more pinpointed in terms of the communication that we're doing.
Great. I think I've got time for one more question, which I'll again combine a couple of questions into one. So thinking about this link between the kind of producers versus the fees coming into the system. So Recycle BC, if a producer came to you and said, hey, we have 100% kind of recycled content material, would that mean that their fees would be different in any way? And sort of linked to that, if a producer came to you and said, hey, 30% of the material being kind of sold into the BC system is ours, can we get 30% of kind of that material back? And can your system support that?
So the short answer is no. The producers who are paying into the system are paying for the packaging that they're putting in there. And the percentage of recycled content does not affect the fees that they are paying. And the second part of the question was, again, what was the second part again?
Sorry, I was having difficulty unmuting myself. My mouse button didn't seem to be working. So yeah, there was essentially two parts, which is sort of like how much can sort of a producer kind of sort of claim back, but then the second part is, can you change fees to depending on the recycled content? So if I was a producer with 100% recycled content kind of PET bottle, then would I pay less, or could I pay less?
Yeah, and the answer is no.
Great. Well, I think we've got a lot more questions to ask, but I think in the next chapter, inclusion, responsibility, and collaboration, I think they probably fit quite well with that. And then we'll have Q&A at the end for any additional remaining questions.
Sounds good. So with that, I am going to introduce Maureen Cooper, who is our Manager of Special Projects. And she's going to speak about, as you said, inclusion, responsibility, and collaboration.
Thank you, Dave. Recycle BC has a commitment to focus on projects which prioritize inclusion, responsibility, and opportunities for collaboration. With a commitment to inclusivity, 10 provincial recycling stewardship agencies led by Recycle BC have come together to form the First Nations Recycling Initiative. A dedicated specialist works with First Nations throughout the province to raise awareness of the First Nations Recycling Initiative, offer resources to support recycling, and organize community collection events. In 2019, 43 First Nations formally participated in some manner in the Recycle BC program, representing approximately 1/3 of the population living on First Nations or treaty settlement land within BC. Focusing on environmental responsibility, Recycle BC now measures and reports our GHG inventory. We recently completed the Climate Smart program and are Climate Smart certified. Climate Smart is a social enterprise based in Vancouver, British Columbia. It enables organizations to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, strengthen their business, and build a resilient economy. Certification means that now we are tracking and calculating emissions across the entire Recycle BC supply chain, right from receipt of materials through to shipping to end markets. We are identified as a leading organization that is tracking and taking action to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. And we are the first PPP program in North America to achieve this. We'll be publishing our 2019 baseline data on our website in the coming months. In prioritizing responsibility, Recycle BC has conducted research over the last couple of years to determine how much paper and packaging currently enters into the residential source-separated organics collection or green bin system. Our focus is on understanding the role that organic waste management collection could have long-term in the overall post-collection management of paper and packaging in BC. The BC provincial government is currently working on an update to its organic matter recycling regulation, and the results of this work will assist in further development of stewardship standards for these materials. Through a research and development collaboration with our partner Merlin Plastics, Recycle BC started collecting other flexible plastic packaging in 2018, which is now accepted at all Recycle BC depots. And examples of this include chip bags, stand-up pouches, and candy bar wrappers. The pilot has allowed for the opportunity to collect any material not capable of being recycled and market it as engineered fuel. Recycle BC continues to seek technological development in this area to enable the recycling of other flexible plastic packaging materials. And Recycle BC has also collaborated with stewards such as Keurig. In 2018, Keurig converted their K-Cup pods to a recyclable format, and we're interested in finding out how many of their empty polypropylene pods made it through to our post-collection facility sorting lines. Recycle BC facilitated this testing with our previous post-collection partners, Emterra Environmental and Merlin Plastics, to determine that 92% of the empty pods made it to the container lines at Emterra and Merlin. And now I will hand it over to Dave Lefebvre.
Thanks, Maureen. And I think I'm bringing us home here. So we have a little bit of time left, and I'm just going to walk through a few final slides that speak a little bit to some work that's happening outside of British Columbia. So obviously, we focused a lot in the last couple of hours on what happens within BC's borders, and it's worth mentioning the work that's happening outside of BC that we're involved in. Of course, We have many large companies that are making some pretty bold commitments. Commitments around recycled content, reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2025. And EPR, of course, is a vital piece of the circular economy. So producers want to understand how to minimize their impact on the environment. And our Center for Material Intelligence, which I think you saw a little bit in the video and you also heard a little bit about, really gives them that opportunity. Now, governments everywhere, as I mentioned right at the start of this whole presentation, are looking at extended producer responsibility, specifically for packaging and paper products. The CSSA, Recycle BC's national partner, is working with various governments to help them understand how to minimize the impact on producers while achieving the goals that governments seek. So there's the Ontario Circular Economy Act that's based on BC's recycling regulation. And the rollout of the Blue Box program that I mentioned will lean heavily on the work done to date by Recycle BC. There's also the G7 Ocean Plastics Charter, 100% reusable, recyclable, or recoverable plastic by 2030, increasing recycled content by at least 50% in plastic products by 2030, supporting secondary markets for plastics, working with industry and government to recycle and reuse at least 55% of plastic packaging by 2030, and recover 100% of all plastics by 2040, as well as increasing domestic capacity to manage plastics. So a lot of things fall under that G7 Ocean Plastics Charter. And then there's the CCME. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, this is a group here in Canada. It's the Council of Ministers of the Environment. And this is a Canada-wide action plan for extended producer responsibility and the Canada-wide strategy for sustainable packaging. So also, there are some other initiatives. So we're obviously participating, or perhaps not obviously, but we are participating in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastics Economy. And our board chair at Recycle BC is the co-chair of the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition. Now, we're obviously very proud of the program that we've created. I'm glad that you had an opportunity to hear from our team directly, to have them tell you the story about some of the work that they are doing, and to be able to present to you some of the results that we're able to achieve, focusing on environmental outcomes to advance the circular economy. And we hope that you found this beneficial. We're gonna pause here now for a final Q&A, and we look forward to hearing your questions.
Great, thanks, David. We've got quite a few questions left, and so please forgive me that this might be slightly all over the place. Think of it as a sort of like a kind of scatter cushion of questions. I wonder whether you could sort of reflect a little on kind of the potential increase in cost to consumers covered by the sort of like the EPR system. Have you seen that much? Are you able to sort of kind of track that much?
So, you know, that's a good question. And the simplest answer is that it's really not possible to determine what costs are absorbed by producers and what costs might be passed on to consumers. I mean, the reality is that the pricing decisions that businesses make incorporate a lot of different factors. Obviously, there are marketing decisions that drive price points. We're all very familiar with questions around, 99 cents versus $1. What impact will that have on sales? So businesses have to make a lot of decisions in terms of whether or not they are going to absorb the costs associated with EPR or whether or not they're going to pass them on. And we suspect that a lot of businesses do absorb those costs. When you look at the total costs of the programs and then you look at the total amount of material supplied, certainly any costs associated on a per unit basis are exceptionally small. And so we can't say that there is a significant impact on the consumer at this point. It would really be asking us to comment on something that is frankly somewhat impossible to figure out.
And then sort of like keeping with relationships, I think upstream, you set out really clearly about kind of who gets charged based on who places material into the marketplace in BC. But do you ever work even more upstream than that. So working with the fossil fuels industry, for example, on potential cost share around, for example, processing?
I can't say that we do. I might touch base with Tamara on this question. I'm pretty sure the answer is no, but Tamara, do you have any insights into that?
The answer is no, that our funding comes from our producers, the brand owners that have our program to meet their regulated obligations.
And then thinking about the sort of like the future kind of, planning for kind of processing, how much do you take into account capacity, especially thinking about as others sort of move to maybe a more EPR system, whether that's coordination with other provinces or maybe coordination with kind of states in the US?
Yeah, I mean, certainly one of the biggest questions I think that most jurisdictions are facing right now is this supply-demand situation that has shifted things dramatically. It's no surprise to everybody who's watching this presentation that when China closed its doors, it definitely affected markets dramatically. We definitely do work through CSSA across Canada, as I mentioned, where we're supporting programs that are already in existence. They are not full producer responsibility programs. They are shared responsibility programs. But we're also seeing a lot of interest in different provinces that have no extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper products. And there are certainly opportunities for collaboration when you look at the different geographic areas. So, right next door to British Columbia, we have the province of Alberta. For more than a year now, the municipalities in Alberta have been calling for a system not unlike British Columbia's in terms of full producer responsibility for residential packaging and paper products. And there are definitely some scale opportunities if you were to see different geographic regions moving in the same direction at the same time. Scale is one of the key elements of full producer responsibility, both from a confusion perspective, because you want the same materials collected no matter where you live in a particular province, but then also in terms of the infrastructure, as you mentioned, in terms of incenting investment. You really need a certain volume of material to make that investment worthwhile. And so being able to create scale is one of the key elements of extended producer responsibility. Certainly here in British Columbia, we have been able to do that more than once with both of our RFPs, our competitive tenders for post-collection. We saw very significant investment here in the province's ability to manage the residential recycling materials. Even the most recent one that Sam was talking about, it was a very significant investment that was brought into the province in order to create those material recovery facilities that are allowing us to keep more materials here in the Pacific Northwest, and that in and of itself is a huge environmental outcome.
And so just thinking about sort of that scalability question, do you have any intentions on extending the EPR program into the non-residential sector? Is that something that you could consider and are considering?
So it's a great question. And as I said at the beginning of this presentation, we are strictly residential packaging and paper products. The regulation that was drafted by the province obligates producers on behalf of those materials, and our producers pay into our program for the collection of those materials. That said, the province of British Columbia just in the last couple of months made an announcement that it was going to be releasing an intentions paper. That intentions paper is looking at a number of different potential opportunities for extended producer responsibility. And one of those is what the province is calling non-residential and what it is colloquially referred to as institutional, commercial, and industrial. So that intentions paper is being consulted on right now. I don't exactly remember when the consultation period is closing, but certainly the government is gathering information on that to make a decision as to whether or not it wishes to obligate that sector of materials.
As you mentioned the government, I wondered whether you could reflect on whether there were sort of particular challenges that you encountered when setting up this EPR system in BC.
I think Tamara said it best earlier in the presentation. One of the biggest lessons that we learned when creating this program was collaboration. It quickly became apparent that we needed all of the resources that exist within the province in order to make this work. And that's why we make such a big point of pointing out that the waste industry is so critically important when it comes to creating this particular program. We rely heavily on the waste industry. And I feel kind of bad because you might have missed that part in the video. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty there, but we had somebody, the CEO of Urban Impact, talking about how they have been able to benefit by participating in our program. When you talk about local governments and the role that they play, many local governments, well, all local governments are collecting materials already. They're collecting garbage. Some of them are collecting organics. They are already communicating to their residents. And so being able to partner with local governments to collect recyclable materials on our behalf, to be able to leverage those communication channels is absolutely pivotal. So I would say collaboration is definitely one of the bigger elements.
So just keeping with that sort of collaboration piece, and in particular thinking about CSSA, how does that relationship kind of function, and thinking about their composition? Like, who are CSSA? Just sort of like a one-sentence answer. And then, do you know whether CSSA can expand beyond the Canadian borders?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And as I mentioned earlier, so CSSA is the largest compliance solution provider in North America. It interacts with thousands of businesses, and it has expertise when it comes to responding to regulations, nascent regulations. So when it comes to British Columbia, for example, when the regulation was drafted, it was CSSA that was involved in helping to draft the program plan and design the system that Recycle BC now operates. Tamara helped design the Recycle BC program in response to the regulation. And that's always what needs to happen. There is a regulation that needs to be brought in by a government, and only then can producers get really clear ideas of what the parameters are and design a system that will work. So CSSA designs programs, and then it plays the support function. So when you look at CSSA's support, it provides significant support when it comes to data and analysis, when it comes to reporting. So I really do invite everybody who's on this call to please visit our website. If I don't see a spike on our website in terms of people visiting it, I'm going to be sorely disappointed, because we post a ton of information on our website. We produce an annual report every single year that is third-party audited, and third-party audited by a financial accountancy firm. So you can tell that the information that's in there is verified information. And in there, you're going to see just how much information CSSA is crunching on behalf of Recycle BC for reporting purposes. It also assists with contract development, with contract management, so contracts with collectors, contracts with stewards. So CSSA really does play that interface between the program, Recycle BC, and the producer. And one of the key elements of CSSA's success, I think, is the fact that a producer really appreciates that they have one place that they need to go, and they can report for so many different programs. And that's why one of the main goals for CSSA is harmonization. As much as possible, we want to see harmonization between the different regulations. It doesn't mean that every single program is the same. We want to be responsive to the circumstances that exist locally. But in terms of some of those higher level concepts, we need to see as much harmonization as possible. Things around the standardized basket of materials, things around de minimis for what constitutes an obligation for producers. These are key elements that help producers streamline. It makes it easier for producers to meet their obligations, and it certainly reduces the burden for them.
Great. And then just quickly, as we sort of keep with the sort of partner sort of theme, I wondered whether you could have some reflections on how the kind of different collection partners and haulers, how the relationship works. What are, how many particular vendors or contractors are in the sort of like system, and then what are the sort of like challenges that you might have about kind of things that a hauler or collection company sort of might have challenges with? So thinking about non-automated curbside collection, for example.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we mentioned earlier in terms of that question around automated versus not automated, we really have designed the program with quite a bit of intentionality. And so when you look at automated versus not automated, what you're actually looking at is often you're looking at a question around contamination. And so we've incented the multi-stream collection of materials, and we do that by providing a higher incentive rate for those materials. When we look at automated single stream, we typically find that there is higher contamination there. And so we provide a lower incentive rate to reflect that. Certainly there's a lot of collaboration that happens with local business. You saw some of those local businesses that were featured in our video. Even our post-collection contract, when we put out our post-collection RFP, it's very clear that no one company can actually meet the needs of an entire province when it comes to providing services when it comes to post-collection. So what we have seen with both of our competitive tenders is that the companies that were successful were companies that built networks by leveraging local businesses, by leveraging businesses that already existed within the waste industry and creating a network that could respond to our needs. And that's really what we're talking about when we say we leave it to the business, to industry to figure out how best to meet our goals. We set the targets, we give them the path that we would like them to follow and where we want them to go, but it's up to them to figure out how best to do that. And what we've seen is a lot of the waste industry gets incorporated into the network. There's huge opportunities for waste companies to see their businesses stabilize in this kind of a program.
Great, and I think in the final minute, because I need to do some wrapping up shortly, but we've got lots and lots of questions. Hopefully all of the questions that are left, if people go to your website, and maybe a plug also to get your website traffic up, that people can find, I think, lots of information on there. But I wondered if you wanted to give a final sort of reflection on, you know, thinking about the successes of your system. What are the sort of like key ingredients? And you've basically got like 55 seconds.
55 seconds and you want the 11 herbs and spices. You know, I'll say it once, I'll say it again, and I'll say it one more time. It's collaboration, certainly. It is speaking to our stakeholders and really getting feedback from our stakeholders on what works and what doesn't. It's being flexible and making sure that we can adapt to the local circumstances. And it's really about having a very true North Star that you're trying to follow. And in our case, it's all about providing as efficient and effective a system as possible, as high environmental outcomes as possible, and at as reasonable price as possible.
Well, I think with that, David, I just want to say thank you so much to you and everyone from Recycle BC that has taken the time to talk through your system. I think people found it hopefully really informative today. I want to also thank the legislators that were on earlier, and also, of course, our sponsors. And then one last thing I should obviously mention is that the WSRA conference is kind of almost upon us. You've got 1 day left to register, so please kind of do that. In terms of next steps, WRSA will be sending out an email to everyone who attended today, and that will have the slides, a link to the recordings, and also the attendee list. So I just want to say finally, thanks so much to everyone who's been involved. Hopefully we've answered a significant number of questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everything, but as they say, time has run out.
Yes, it has. Thank you, Andy, and I'll echo that. Thank you to all of Recycle BC, all of our speakers, our sponsors, and everybody else. And I hope that everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.